Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere cold, like really cold. Imagine stepping outside and instantly feeling your nose hairs freeze. That kind of cold. You're about to time slip into a Viking village in the dead of winter, where temperatures plunge well below freezing and the wind howls like it's got a personal vendetta. You think you've packed warmly, but spoiler alert, you haven't. Your modern parka, laughable. Your high-tech boots, cute. You're about to find out how very not prepared you are for what lies ahead. Before we step into the long frozen shadows of the past, quick reminder, if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Also, let me know what city you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love hearing how far this little campfire of ours reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You land with a jolt, knees deep in snow, the air sharp in your lungs, so cold it feels like it might slice you from the inside. Before you can take stock of your surroundings, a gust of icy wind smacks your face like a Viking slap. You squint through the flurry and spot flickering light ahead. A village, nestled along a fjord, its rooftops puffing out columns of smoke that curl into the Arctic twilight like ghosts on coffee break. Your boots crunch over the snow as you approach, but it's not just snow, it's ice. Hard-packed and slick as glass. The sun's been gone for hours, though technically it's only mid-afternoon. Winter near the Arctic Circle isn't big on daylight. Everything's a muted blue-grey, like the world's been dunked in a vat of cold steel. Your breath comes out in thick plumes, and your fingers, already tingling. You're seriously starting to doubt your survival odds. As you step into the main path of the village, your senses are immediately ambushed. The smell hits first. Smoke, wet wool, something vaguely fishy, and the sharp tang of animal manure. The sound follows. Muffled voices, the distant clank of metal on metal, and the occasional bleat of an unhappy goat. But it's not chaotic. It's a soft bustle. Life is happening here, steadily, despite the cold that wants to kill everything. You duck into the nearest building, mostly out of desperation. The door is low, the kind you have to crouch into, and it opens with a low creak. You step inside and are instantly enveloped in something glorious. Heat. It rolls over you like warm honey seeping into your bones. Inside it's dim, lit only by firelight and a few flickering oil lamps. Shadows dance across the wooden beams like ancient spirits doing slow yoga. You're in a Viking longhouse. Long, narrow and almost womb-like. Thick wooden walls hold in the warmth, and the roof is so well insulated you can't even hear the wind outside anymore. The fire pit runs right down the centre, a glowing ribbon of red and orange. Smoke drifts lazily upward through a hole in the roof, though not quickly enough to spare your eyes. You cough once, twice, your lungs staging a protest, but nobody else seems to mind. In fact, they look pretty comfy. Furs are piled thick on benches, people are huddled close, and the atmosphere is cosy. That can't be right. You're supposed to be freezing to death. Here's the thing. They've got this down to a science, even if they wouldn't call it that. Viking villages didn't freeze in winter because they couldn't. Freezing meant dying, and the Norse were nothing if not pragmatic. Everything, from the way they built their homes to how they lived inside them, was designed to beat the cold. Your hosts barely glance your way. Newcomers, apparitions, maybe just another wandering spirit to them. They're focused on food, stitching, scraping hides. One man stokes the fire, methodically feeding it wood that's been drying for months. A woman squats by a bubbling pot of something that smells like turnip and boiled meat. A toddler waddles past in what looks like a bearskin onesie. Even the dogs curled near the hearth seem to radiate smug warmth. As you warm up, you start noticing details. The walls are made from overlapping planks, tight, sturdy, and reinforced with thick layers of mud and animal dung for insulation. The roof is buried under turf and snow, not in spite of the weather, but because of it. Snow is an insulator, weirdly enough, like nature's weird little thermal blanket. Who knew? There's no glass in the windows, there aren't really windows, but that's on purpose too. Less heat escapes, and whatever light they need comes from the fire, from lamps burning fish oil, and from eyes well trained to work in twilight. Here's your first real historical fact of the night. Viking longhouses were typically heated by a central hearth, with no chimney. The smoke lingered just beneath the roof, warming the upper part of the room before slowly escaping. It was smoky, sure, but it also helped kill bacteria and keep bugs away. And surprisingly, it worked like primitive insulation, trapping heat inside. Now for the quirky part, some Viking homes had straw-stuffed cat skins hanging near the doors to block drafts. Yep, cat skins. No one said it was a pet-friendly era, but not everything's agreed upon. Historians still debate whether all Viking villages used the same architectural tricks, or if different regions had wildly different methods based on available materials. The further north you go, the more earth-covered and insulated the structures get. But was that style universal or just regional necessity? That's still up for scholarly grabs. Back in the longhouse, someone hands you a horn filled with a hot, slightly sour liquid. You sip. It's mead, and it's warm. The alcohol hits your chest like a tiny bonfire. Around you, people eat in quiet contentment. They're not shivering. They're not wrapped in 20 layers. They're thriving. And you? You're finally starting to feel your toes again. You don't really want to leave the longhouse. It's warm, it smells like meat and wood smoke, and you're finally starting to feel your face again. But curiosity is a loud voice in your head, and you kind of want to see how this whole heat situation actually works. Because somehow, this is surviving winter in a place where the wind can literally sandpaper your skin off. So you step back outside, instantly regretting it, and shuffle toward another building, long, low, with thick turf piled across the roof, like it's trying to disappear into the earth. This one feels even warmer inside, which seems impossible until you realise you've just stepped into the heart of Viking winter engineering. A longhouse isn't just a cosy lodge with a big fire, it's an ancient, carefully planned, heat-retaining masterpiece. You walk the full length of this one, which easily stretches 30 metres. That's nearly 100 feet of wood, turf, smoke and secrets. The walls are built from massive timber logs, notched and locked together so tightly that not even a whisper of wind could sneak through. Outside, the roof looks like part of a hillside. Inside, it's a vault of low-hanging rafters, dark and glistening with years of smoke. As you move further in, it hits you. This place doesn't just trap heat, it makes it. The fire at the centre runs the full length of the building, not a fireplace, not a stove, just an open, shallow trench of glowing coals and gently crackling logs. The smoke rises straight up, mostly. It collects in the rafters in slow, swirling clouds. You'd think that would be a problem, but no one's coughing or blinking. Somehow, they've just gotten used to living in a mild fog of smoke. And here's where the magic of Viking heating really shines. That smoke. It's not wasted. It warms the roof, lingers in the rafters, and hangs like a heated blanket above everyone's heads. It might be a little lung-tickling, but it's also a giant thermal buffer. You look up, and despite the haze, you realise something important. The rafters are low. Not cathedral high like in fantasy movies. These ceilings are designed to keep heat close, not let it drift away into useless empty air. You find a spot near the wall where an older woman is stirring a pot of barley and root vegetables, steam rising like a second ghost layer. The warmth here is almost sauna level, and you notice how strategic everything is. Benches built into the wall sit above the fire pit's edge, giving people both a place to sit and better heat exposure. Sleeping platforms line the walls, stacked like bunk beds but bigger, and filled with straw, wool and fur, heat-conserving little caves for the whole family to burrow into. Here's a historical fact to store away for your next trivia night. Viking longhouses were built with what's called thermal zoning. The hearth in the centre created a heat gradient, warmest in the middle and cooler at the ends. People didn't just randomly plop down, they organised themselves by temperature needs. Elderly, newborn, you sleep close to the fire. Rowdy teenagers and slightly frozen goats, off to the cooler edges. Everyone found their thermal niche, and no square metre of heat was wasted. Also, quirky fact incoming, they sometimes brought animals inside at night. Not out of compassion, though it sounds cute. It was purely practical. Livestock gave off heat. A couple of cows in the corner weren't just dinner waiting to happen, they were furry little radiators with hooves. So if you're imagining Viking nights with chickens pecking near your pillow and goats farting softly in the dark, you're not wrong. Of course, this whole setup isn't without its debates. One ongoing scholarly argument is about how often fires were actually kept burning through the night. Some archaeologists say the hearths were never allowed to go out, 24/7 heat or bust. Others believe fires were banked overnight to save fuel and restarted in the morning, depending on wood supply and weather. The evidence is murky, buried under centuries of ash and conflicting interpretations. Either way, It's clear that controlling fire was the top survival priority. You watch as one of the younger villagers shuffles past carrying an armload of firewood. You follow them outside only to realise something alarming. It's even colder than before. The wind's picked up, howling through the village with a mournful, hungry sound, and yet the longhouse holds firm. You glance back and see the thick turf roof glistening under a thin crust of snow, as if the entire building is wearing a giant winter hat. You notice now how tightly the door shuts. No cracks, no drafts. And the threshold is raised slightly to keep snow and cold air from sneaking in underfoot. Every inch of this place is engineered with a kind of quiet genius. You wander between buildings and realise they all face the same direction, southward. Always. Not a coincidence. That layout minimises exposure to northern winds while soaking up whatever pitiful daylight sneaks over the horizon. The buildings are grouped close too, not just for community but to create microclimates. The more compact the village, the less surface area for the wind to claw at. Your breath fogs again, and you duck back into another longhouse, this one even more crowded. People are cooking, sewing, telling stories and sharpening blades by the flicker of firelight. The air's heavy with warmth and the unmistakable funk of humans living elbow to elbow through endless dark months. It should feel claustrophobic, but weirdly it doesn't. It feels alive. And that's the thing, isn't it? These longhouses aren't just shelters, they're ecosystems, self-contained environments that manage heat, light, air, and bodies like early versions of climate-controlled habitats. In a world where winter kills anything unprepared, the Vikings built homes that fought back. You settle onto a bench near the fire. The crackling wood, the hum of voices, the warm press of furs against your side, it all starts to blur into something hypnotic. Outside, it's a frozen wasteland. In here, you could almost fall asleep. And honestly, you probably will. You wake slowly, surrounded by muffled voices, flickering shadows, and a heat so steady it's almost like breathing in warmth itself. For a moment, you forget where you are, until the sharp scent of smoke and the occasional bleat of something vaguely goat-shaped remind you. Right, Viking longhouse, Arctic winter, possibly 900 AD, no cell service, no thermostat, and yet, you're not freezing, not even close. You sit up from the thick fur pile you apparently passed out in, stretching like some reanimated walrus. Around you, life is already in motion. People are stirring porridge, threading bone needles, scraping hides. Kids run barefoot across packed earth floors without a care in the world. And here's the kicker, the floor isn't even cold. It's not warm exactly, but it isn't that soul-sucking, ice-through-the-feet chill you expect from living on frozen ground. You shuffle to the nearest wall and run your hand along it. It's thick, really thick, made from wide timber planks, packed tight with a mixture of clay, straw, moss, and yes, animal dung. Glamorous? Not even a little, but effective, like a thermal wall of Viking logic. That mixture doesn't just plug holes, it traps air, blocks wind, and buffers against the deep freeze just inches away on the other side. Now you look up. The ceiling is a patchwork of beams, tightly lashed, covered in layered turf and sod. From the outside, it probably looks like a hobbit hill with an inferiority complex, but in here, that roof is doing work. It traps warmth. The sod layer, insulated by snow in winter, holds the heat like a thermal blanket baked by centuries of common sense. No shingles, no tiles, no fragile materials, just dirt and grass and the occasional squirrel if you're unlucky. Here's a historical fact you'll want to remember. Viking walls could be over 1/2 metre thick, and sod roofs might weigh several tons. That heft wasn't just structural, it was strategic. The thermal mass of thick earth walls and roofs helped maintain a stable internal temperature. Cold didn't sneak in, and warmth didn't escape easily. It wasn't exactly cosy in the Martha Stewart sense, but it was durable, predictable, and, most importantly, livable. You spot a young man walking across the room with something heavy in his arms. You follow him outside where the light is that weird polar twilight that feels like sunset but never quite gets there. He's hauling a huge block of turf toward another structure at the edge of the village. You squint. It's not a house. It's a storage hut half buried in the ground, with the same thick sod roof and walls sunk into a pit. Another little trick. Semi-subterranean buildings use the Earth's own temperature regulation to stay above freezing, even when it's brutal outside. As you examine the sod layers closer, you see how they're stacked. grass side down, dirt packed tight, overlapping like messy green bricks. It's labour-intensive and heavy, but it works. Each chunk acts like a cold-proof brick in a medieval igloo that actually stays warm. A woman joins you outside, pulling a wool cloak tighter around her shoulders. She notices your shiver and grins, then taps her foot against the wall of the longhouse. You get the feeling she's proud of it, and honestly, she should be. This isn't architecture. This is war against the elements, and the Vikings came to win. But it wasn't just the materials, it was how they used them. You walk with her around the village, and now you start to see a pattern. Every building is oriented to avoid the worst of the wind. Doors face away from the icy gusts that blow from the north. The gaps between houses are narrow, reducing airflow that could strip away heat. Some homes even have small entry vestibules, like a double door setup to trap warmth inside before the cold can rush in. And here's the quirky twist. Some archaeologists believe that Vikings intentionally let snow build up on roofs and against walls during winter. Not to clear it away, but to use it. Why? Because snow, oddly enough, is an excellent insulator. It traps air within its layers and slows the transfer of heat. So while it looks like they've been buried alive by weather, they're actually just leaning into nature's own winter blanket. Imagine that. Welcoming a blizzard because it might lower your heating bill. Now, for the debate. Scholars still argue over exactly how standardized Viking construction was. Some believe these homes followed precise cultural blueprints across Scandinavia. Longhouses here, turf walls there, a sort of Viking IKEA kit of parts. Others argue it was far more regional, evolving based on local conditions, materials, and even personal wealth. Did Icelandic Vikings live the same way as their Swedish cousins? Were wealthier Norse families building McLonghouses with extra rooms and fancier insulation? The jury's still out. Back in the village, you make your way toward one of the more elaborate-looking houses. It's got thicker walls, a higher ridgepole, and a slightly more polished look to the timberwork. Inside, it's warmer, brighter. The fire burns cleaner. The benches are padded thicker. This isn't a different kind of home. It's just a richer one. Thermal comfort, it turns out, also followed a class system. If you had more livestock, better materials, and more help building, you had a better shot at staying warm and healthy through winter. You sit for a while by the central fire again, feeling the radiating glow on your skin. The walls hum with quiet life. Voices low, the occasional clink of tools, someone sharpening a blade just out of sight. You look around and realise you could learn something here. Not just about survival, but about design. These people didn't have science degrees or advanced tools, but they understood their world. They watched the wind, read the snow, felt the heat rise and planned their homes accordingly. And somehow, despite the frozen hellscape waiting just beyond the village, they weren't huddled in misery. They were living. They were laughing, working, sleeping, celebrating. Even barefoot toddlers running around like frostbite isn't even a thing. You pull the cloak tighter around you and lean back against the timber wall. Thick, warm, protective. And for the first time since arriving in this frozen time capsule, you think, maybe you could survive this, if you had a good longhouse. It doesn't take long to notice that wherever you go in this Viking village, fire is never far away. Not once have you seen anyone sitting in a corner just shivering, hoping for the best. There's always a flame burning, somewhere, in the longhouses, in open cooking pits, in stone-ringed hearths at the centre of tiny workshops. Fire is everywhere. And now that you've felt the difference it makes, you realise something kind of profound. Without constant flame, nothing here works. Not the people, not the animals, not the walls. Nothing. You find yourself sitting by one of the smaller hearths now, tucked into the corner of what might be a communal weaving hut. The walls here are lined with spindles and looms, but the centrepiece is still the fire. A slow-burning, well-tended little blaze, giving off just enough heat to keep your fingers functional. Beside you, two women spin thread in rhythmic silence, their hands moving like it's muscle memory from generations back. Neither flinches as sparks crackle from the fire. It's a sound they live with day in, day out. It's the heartbeat of this entire frozen civilization. And it's not just warmth, it's life. Fire cooks food, softens leather, boils water, hardens metal, and keeps spirits up when the sun disappears for days, or weeks. You start to understand why Norse mythology treated fire with respect, maybe even reverence. It wasn't just a tool, it was a presence. something that had to be fed, tended, respected. And in return, it gave you a fighting chance against a landscape that frankly doesn't care if you live or freeze stiff in your sleep. You head back into the main longhouse and take a closer look at the fire trench. It's about 2 feet wide, running straight down the centre like a glowing spine. Flat stones line the bottom, helping distribute heat and stabilise the burning logs. There's no metal grate, no ash bucket, just a rhythm of wood, flame, smoke and care. One person constantly monitors it, adding fuel, stirring coals, shifting logs. That person's job isn't just important, it's essential. They're the lifeline. If that fire dies overnight, the entire house could freeze before dawn. Here's a solid historical nugget. Viking hearths weren't just practical, they were symbolic. The fire wasn't allowed to go out unless the entire household was moving or mourning. In some sagas, the hearth flame was seen almost as a guardian spirit, passed from mother to daughter, generation to generation. You didn't just cook with it, you trusted it. The woman in charge of the fire gives you a sideways glance, then gestures for you to pass her a bundle of dried twigs. You shuffle over, hands half frozen, and set the bundle down near her feet. She feeds it to the flame with the practiced motion of someone who's done this since childhood. There's no grand ritual, but there is reverence, and honestly, you're starting to share it. Now here's the quirky bit. Vikings didn't use flint and steel every time they needed to start a fire. Those were backups. Most homes had smouldering coals banked in ash, or stored in a container called a fire pot to keep embers hot overnight. No one wanted to start from scratch if they could avoid it. And if things went really wrong, you might have to borrow fire from a neighbour, which in sub-zero conditions was both humbling and potentially humiliating. Imagine knocking on your neighbour's longhouse at 3 in the morning like, "Hey, so, I let my hearth go out and now I'm dying. Could I steal a spark?" Of course, historians debate just how communal firekeeping really was. Did entire villages rely on a few centralised hearths in tougher months? Or did each family unit fiercely guard its own flame, turning a simple blaze into a point of pride? There's evidence for both. Some villages may have shared larger communal fires, especially for things like feasts or metalwork. Others suggest every home had to maintain its own no matter what. It might have varied wildly depending on resources, or just on whose longhouse was biggest. You glance around and realise how much of the daily routine revolves around this one central fire. Pots hang from tripods. Meat dries from rafters above it. Kids play near the edges, close, but not too close, like the warmth teaches them instinctively where the safety line is. You notice now that the beds and benches are always positioned just right, not by accident, but by intent. Warm zones, heat shadows. Sleeping with your back to the fire means waking up stiff. Sleeping too close means choking on smoke or catching a rogue spark to the beard. There's a balance here, a fire feng shui, and everyone knows the rules. And when the sun goes down, not that it was doing much to begin with, the fire becomes the centre of everything. People tell stories around it, sing songs, sharpen blades, carve charms, braid hair. The longhouse turns into a low-lit theatre of survival and mythology, where the heat carries not just warmth, but meaning. Tales of Thor's hammer, Odin's wisdom, the end of the world and the warmth that might survive it. All of it shared in firelight. You find yourself leaning into the glow, your skin prickling pleasantly from the radiant heat, your eyes reflecting flickers of orange and gold. Outside, the wind howls and scratches against the door like something hungry. But here, in this glowing cave of breath and flame, you're safe, maybe even a little sleepy. Your final thought before drifting into something like a nap is this. It's not just the fire that keeps them alive, it's how they use it. Strategically, spiritually, relentlessly. Fire isn't just a tool for the Vikings, it's their religion, their technology, their community centre, and their last line of defence against the cold abyss waiting just beyond the walls. And yeah, it's starting to warm you up too. There's no graceful way to put this. Your bed tonight is a tangled nest of sheepskins, bear hides, and the occasional elbow to the ribs. You're not in a private room or even a separate bedroll. You're in what could only be described as a human pile. A warm, breathing, occasionally snoring ecosystem of people, animals and fabric that smells faintly of wood smoke and yesterday's stew. It's not glamorous, but holy frostbite, it works. You're nestled into a side bench of the longhouse, half upright, buried under layers of woven wool and matted fur, pressed elbow to shoulder with a boy who keeps murmuring in his sleep, and a shaggy goat that's made itself distressingly comfortable against your foot. The fire crackles lazily at the centre of the room, casting long shadows that shift and melt across the rafters. Every breath of warm air is precious, and you're surprised to find yourself actually cosy. This, you're learning, is the Viking version of central heating. People. Body heat is currency here and nobody wastes it. Families sleep in close quarters not just for emotional connection but for survival. In winter, privacy comes second to not freezing to death in your sleep. Infants are bundled against their mothers. Toddlers sprawl across laps. Elders are tucked under the thickest furs like revered embers. Even animals get prime spots near the fire if they radiate enough warmth. You shift slightly, trying not to wake the goat and take stock. The longhouse is still quiet, though not silent. Someone's turning over in their bunk. A baby fusses briefly, then falls back into rhythmic breathing. Somewhere near the far end you hear a soft hum. Someone singing, or maybe just talking to themselves. The kind of sounds that mean life. Still going. Still warm. Here's your history fix for the night. Viking longhouses typically had built-in raised platforms along the walls, functioning as both seating during the day and communal sleeping areas at night. No mattresses, of course. Just layers of straw, wool and fur often shared by multiple people. It wasn't considered weird or uncomfortable. It was efficient. A warm body next to you was worth more than a soft pillow. And in the depths of an Arctic winter, those extra 10 degrees of body heat could literally mean the difference between waking up or not waking up at all. Now for the quirky part. Brace yourself. Some Viking families invited their livestock into the longhouse during particularly harsh winters. We're not talking about one polite goat here and there. We're talking cows, sheep, even pigs brought indoors at night. Not just for heat, but to prevent them from freezing or being stolen. That also meant these people were sleeping, eating, and storytelling next to creatures that occasionally pooped in the corner. Cozy, yes. Sanitary, absolutely not. But again, survival isn't about 5-star conditions. It's about what keeps your blood circulating. There's a lively debate among historians about just how common this practice was. Some argue that only the poorest households relied on animals for warmth, while others insist it was a widespread, normalised practice across Norse settlements. After all, if you're living on the northern edge of the world, you use every asset you've got, even if it's covered in fur and smells like a stable. You turn your head slightly and notice the air's grown thicker. Not colder, just heavier. That's the breath of 30-some people and animals sharing one enclosed space. It's warm, but it's also damp, and slightly funky in that way shared spaces tend to get. No scented candles here. The scent is earthy, sweat, wool, smoke, and hay, all layered into something that's somehow comforting. Like a sauna wrapped in an armpit. You think about your own sleeping habits, your climate-controlled apartment, memory foam mattress, sound machine app. None of it would work here. Not the solitude, not the plush bedding. Out here, you need the proximity, the layers, the constant low hum of life around you. Isolation in a place like this isn't peaceful. It's fatal. Here, community is insulation. Morning creeps in like a secret. There's no sunrise, not really. Just a slight brightening in the smoke-coloured sky beyond the door. The longhouse stirs slowly. Someone adds logs to the fire. A woman rustles under her furs, groaning awake, her hair an untamed storm of braids and sleep. Children yawn like tiny bears, poking their heads out from blankets, blinking through the haze. Even the goat finally stretches, stands, and trots off with what can only be described as smug purpose. You wriggle out of your cocoon and stretch. Every joint complains, but your core, still warm. Your breath fogs faintly in the air, but it's a world away from the freeze waiting outside. The fire's held through the night, and so have you. Maybe it's the layers. Maybe it's the goat. Maybe it's the sheer Viking stubbornness that seems to soak into everything here like smoke into wool. You sip from a clay cup someone hands you. Lukewarm broth, thick with root vegetables and something unidentifiable. It's salty, earthy, and just the thing to start a morning without central heating. People are already busy. The longhouse is a hive again. Firewood is stacked, ashes swept, furs shaken out. The communal energy here is low-key electric. No one wastes time. There's a rhythm to it. Chores, warmth, survival. Repeat. You walk outside, breath sharp in your nose, the cold biting at your cheeks. But now you notice something different. You're not panicking. Your body knows what to do. Move. Stay close to others. Keep your layers sealed. The warmth of the longhouse lingers under your skin, like an ember tucked deep in your chest. And that's the secret, isn't it? It's not just architecture or clothing or even fire. It's people. Stacked together, tangled in fur, breathing shared warmth into the dark hours. The Viking winter strategy isn't solitary. It's deeply, fundamentally communal. You feel it as you walk among the villagers now. Closeness not just out of necessity but out of design. A culture built not around walls or windows but around shared heat, shared space, shared lives. It's messy, it's noisy, and it absolutely smells like wet dog and onion soup. But you're still here, still warm, still alive. You finally figured out how to stay warm enough not to hate your life every second, but now it's time to face a brutal truth. Your sleek, zippered, modern jacket, it's useless here. The seams leak wind. The synthetic fibres trap exactly zero warmth once they get damp, which is always. It might as well be made of tissue paper and bad decisions. And when you look around at your Viking neighbours, you start to notice something they all have in common. Wool. Wall-to-wall wool. Wool on their bodies. Wool in their boots. Wool around their heads. And probably a little stuck in their teeth. You're handed a tunic. Coarse, heavy, and the colour of week-old porridge. It smells faintly like lanolin and barnyard, but it's warm, and that's all that matters. You pull it over your head and immediately feel the difference. Wool doesn't try to be soft or glamorous. It just works. It traps heat, even when it's wet. It breathes when it's warm. It's basically the Swiss Army knife of survival fibres, and the Vikings wore it like their lives depended on it, because they did. Under that tunic you've got another layer. A linen undershirt, scratchy but lighter. A moisture-wicking base layer before those were a thing. Then wool trousers, thick socks, fur-lined boots, and a massive itchy cloak that feels like hugging a giant aggressive sheep. You may not win any fashion contest, but you're warm, and that's all anyone's aiming for here. One of the women eyes your outfit, adjusts your collar like you're a child playing dress-up, and nods in reluctant approval. Now you look less like you'll die before dinner, her expression seems to say. Progress. Here's your fact for the fireside. Viking clothing, especially in winter, was all about strategic layering. Wool was king. Not the soft, hand-washed kind from the upscale shops. No, this was rugged, homespun, full of lanolin, water-resistant and durable as tree bark. Garments were sewn with bone needles, reinforced with sinew or linen thread, and often patched over and over again rather than discarded. A single cloak might be passed down for decades, worn to threads and rewoven again. Clothing wasn't disposable, it was armour. You step out into the snow-dusted village again, wrapped in enough wool to smother a small mammoth, and suddenly the wind doesn't feel like knives on your skin. Your face is still exposed and freezing, but your core? Toasty. You begin to see why the Vikings had such a complex relationship with wool. It was warmth, it was wealth, and it was absolutely essential. And here's something delightfully weird. Some Viking garments were woven with decorative patterns, not just for looks, but to strengthen the fabric. Turns out adding little zigzags and chevrons doesn't just say fashion statement, it also adds structural integrity. Like Viking embroidery meets light armour. They were literally sewing resilience into their sleeves. There's also evidence of woolen felt being made, thick, compressed mats of fabric used for boots, mittens and padding. Imagine wool mashed together until it's as dense as a doormat, then tied around your legs like makeshift shin guards. That's your winter wear. Functional? Yes. Comfortable? Debatable. But here's the debate to spin around your brain while your toes thaw. Were the Vikings really walking around looking like wool-draped warriors all winter, or was some of this clothing just for show? Some scholars argue that certain dramatic garments, embroidered cloaks, brooch-heavy tunics, were ceremonial or only worn by the wealthy. Others say, no, this was everyday wear. Even the poorest villager had at least two sets, one for labour, one for looking slightly less like a forest troll at gatherings. But we can't know for sure. Cloth rarely survives 1,000 years in the dirt. All we've got are remnants and runes and educated guesses. You follow a group heading out of the village toward the forest, a line of wool-cloaked figures moving like mossy shadows through the snow. They're on a firewood run, but it might as well be a polar expedition. Everyone is wrapped head to toe, their breath steaming, their footsteps muffled. You can feel the weight of the layers on your own body, each step more deliberate, less graceful, but you're warm, and honestly, that's enough to feel invincible. You help haul a few small logs back, your wool mittens stiff and thick. You're clumsy, slow, but not freezing to death. It's a win. The others barely seem to break a sweat. They've adapted to this weight, this friction, this constant management of clothing. You pass a few huts along the way, noticing thick woolen drapes hanging across doorways. No glass, no proper doors, just layers of heavy fabric keeping the wind at bay. Back at the longhouse, you hang your cloak near the fire. It's damp but not soaked because, say it with me, wool still insulates when wet. It's kind of like magic, except the magic smells faintly like wet animal and singed hair. You help mend a torn mitten, watching a woman sew with practiced speed. The needle is bone, the thread is spun wool, and the movement is hypnotic. It's not fast fashion, it's forever fashion. Every stitch is investment, every patch tells a story. There's no such thing as new season here, just warmer, sturdier, more patched together than the last. You realise, sitting there with smoke in your eyes and wool in your teeth, that warmth isn't just about temperature, it's about trust in the things you make, the layers you build, and the traditions passed down stitch by stitch. So when you finally crawl back into your nest of furs that night, wrapped in 3 layers of scratchy wool and smelling slightly like sheep and smoke, you no longer care that you look like a walking rug. You're warm, you're dry, you've adapted, and somewhere, in the flicker of firelight and the rustle of old cloth, you think you hear the Vikings whisper, "Told you so." You wake up coughing. Not a delicate, "oh no, I have a cold" kind of cough, but a full-blown hacking fit that makes your eyes water and your throat feel like it's been scoured with pine resin and regret. Your lungs are trying to evacuate the smoke you've been marinating in all night, and for a second you wonder if something's on fire. It's not. This is just how it is. Inside the longhouse, the smoke lingers thick and low, a grey fuzzy ceiling only a few feet above your head. It doesn't rise and vanish like you'd expect. There's no chimney here, just a hole in the roof directly above the central hearth. And let's be honest, it's doing its best, but the physics aren't exactly winning. Instead, the smoke floats up, hits the cold air, and then sits there, waiting patiently for you to inhale it. The surprising part, no one else seems to care. Or maybe they've just evolved smoke-resistant lungs from years of exposure. Everyone moves through the haze with casual efficiency, cooking breakfast, feeding animals, sharpening knives, all like they're not standing in what would legally qualify as a violation of every modern fire code. So, here's your hard historical truth. Viking longhouses rarely had chimneys, not because they couldn't build them, but because they didn't want them. A wide, open vent near the ridgepole of the roof was enough to let some smoke out, but just enough. The rest hung around, trapped in the upper rafters, and here's the twist, that smoke was doing more than annoying your respiratory system. It was insulating the house. Seriously. Smoke lingering in the rafters created a barrier of warm air near the roof, reducing heat loss and protecting the upper levels of the house. And there was a bonus. Smoke also preserved wood and deterred pests. So the next time you're gasping in a Viking living room and wondering why your eyebrows feel smoky, just remember, it's keeping the mice out and the heat in. Still, it's not a spa experience. Your eyes sting. Your hair smells like you lost a fight with a campfire. And at least twice during breakfast you accidentally bite into something that tastes like smoked fish and realise it's not supposed to be smoked fish. One of the men notices your struggle and with a smirk motions toward the roof. He mimics waving smoke toward the opening, then shrugs. That's the system. You want less smoke? You wave it toward the hole, maybe crack the door if the wind's not vicious. It's DIY ventilation with a 900-year-old twist. And now, for something delightfully weird, some scholars believe that Viking households intentionally let smoke build up, not just for insulation, but to cure the entire interior. Over time, smoke helped to dry out the wood, preserve the wool hanging from the rafters, and even smoke-cure meat strung along the beams. You look up, and yep, there's a string of dried fish just chilling above your head, like it's in some sort of Norse charcuterie heaven. It's a whole new level of multi-purpose home decor. But here comes the debate. Was this lack of chimney purely practical, or was it also cultural? Some historians argue that Vikings simply didn't prioritise smoke-free living because, well, they didn't know any better. Others say they chose the smoke for its many benefits and just got used to the side effects. Still others suggest that adding a chimney or flue would have allowed too much heat to escape, an unacceptable loss in the subarctic nightmare they called winter. There's no consensus, and frankly, as your eyes water for the third time in 10 minutes, you stop caring. All you know is, the Vikings walked so your fireplace Instagram reel could run. You head outside for a breath of fresh, brutally cold air. It smacks your face with icy clarity and clears your sinuses in half a second. You inhale deeply. It's so crisp, it almost hurts. But after 15 minutes of coughing through breakfast stew, it feels amazing. Your eyes stop watering, your lungs expand, you can think again, and then your nose starts to go numb, and back inside the longhouse, smoke doesn't feel like the enemy anymore. It feels like a weird, eye-stinging friend. A necessary evil. You duck under the low rafters and take a seat near the fire again, watching the smoke drift and eddy, rising lazily toward that open hole in the ceiling. You notice how the oldest people in the house sit low, closest to the floor, while the youngest, kids, teens, that one suspiciously athletic-looking goat, move around nearer the fire, sometimes directly in the smoke cloud. It's a hierarchy of breathability. The older you get, the more you figure out where the good air is. And there is good air. The smoke doesn't blanket the entire house. It hovers near the top, depending on how high the ceiling is. And now you see the subtle genius. The rafters aren't just structural. They break up the flow, trap the heat, and hold the smoke in layers, like stacked quilts of warm air. Some smoke escapes through the hole, but some just lingers, gently cooking everything below it. A slow roast, human addition. Even the fabrics here tell the same story. Wool cloaks are hung in the smoky rafters to dry and disinfect. Fish dangle overhead, becoming next month's dinner one wisp of smoke at a time. There's even a carved charm, a tiny wooden Thor's hammer, hanging from a rafter, darkened with soot, like it's been warding off drafts and frost demons for a decade. You reach up and pull a piece of cloth off the wall, a woven drape that was blocking one of the windward gaps. It's heavy, almost crunchy with smoke residue, but it smells like heat and history. You run your fingers over the weave and realise this isn't just a curtain. It's a thermal shield, a time-worn defence against a world that wants to kill you with cold. And so, with lungs still slightly smoky and hair permanently infused with odour campfire, you finally get it. Smoke isn't an accident here. It's not just the cost of heating a space without modern tech. It's part of the system. It protects, insulates, preserves. You're living in a sauna, a smokehouse, and a fortress all at once, and somehow it works. You lean back, let the heat soak in, and breathe shallowly, like everyone else does. You're learning. And your lungs, they'll forgive you, eventually. By now you've accepted a few Viking truths. Fire never sleeps, wool is your new religion, and smoke is a necessary evil that lives rent-free in your lungs. But today, you're going to learn something completely backwards from what your modern instincts tell you, and it starts with snow. Specifically, the stuff packed high on the roof of the longhouse like frosting on an ancient gingerbread house. You're standing outside now, wrapped in roughly 8 layers of clothing that all smell vaguely of damp sheep, staring up at the roof of the longhouse. It's absolutely buried in snow, inches of it, possibly feet. And your brain, trained by years of roof-clearing public service announcements, is screaming, "This is bad! Danger! Collapse imminent!" But no one here is grabbing a ladder or a snow rake. In fact, nobody seems concerned at all. One of the men even slaps a chunk of fresh snow onto the roof like he's adding insulation. That's when it clicks. They're not trying to keep the snow off. They're letting it stay, on purpose. It turns out snow isn't the enemy here. In the Viking world, snow is more like unpaid help. Cold, silent, slightly heavy help that actually insulates better than you'd think. Once it's packed and crusted over, it creates a buffer layer, keeping the heat in and the biting wind out. It's the opposite of what you're used to, this idea that the snow blanket smothering the longhouse is actually helping it stay warm. Here's your historical gold nugget. The Vikings didn't just tolerate snow on their buildings, they used it. Sod roofs, already thick with grass and dirt, acted like a sponge for snowfall. The snow would settle, freeze, and turn the entire roof into a thermal cap. The more snow, the better, so long as it didn't collapse the roof, which conveniently was built strong and low to avoid just that. Some archaeologists believe that the layered effect, sod plus snow, functioned almost like a primitive form of passive solar heating. The house soaked in warmth during daylight, minimal as it was, and the snow prevented that heat from radiating back out into the frozen abyss. The result? A structure that looked half buried but felt halfway livable. You step back from the longhouse and scan the rest of the village. The snow is piled thick against walls, drifted into doorways, crusted over animal pens and storage huts, and yet not a single soul is out there clearing it away. In your world, that would be an insurance nightmare. Here, it's thermal strategy. One of the women passing by hands you a wooden shovel and points to a small shed where snow has started to press in around the entrance. You trudge over, start digging, and find something surprising. The snow you're clearing is on the outside only. Inside, it's dry, the walls cool but not icy, and there's even a hint of warmth still trapped from yesterday's sun and shared body heat. Snow insulated the space like styrofoam. If styrofoam were natural, heavy, and occasionally home to a hibernating mouse. You ask, haltingly, and mostly with gestures, if they ever remove the snow, and one of the elders chuckles and mimics a collapse with his hands. Ah, they only shovel when the weight gets dangerous, otherwise snow stays. So now you've added not shoveling the roof to your growing list of Viking survival hacks. Want a quirky fact to chew on like freeze-dried seal jerky? In some Norse folktales, snow was believed to be a blessing from the gods, protection against dark spirits, evil weather, and disease. It was said that snow seals the warmth in and the dark things out. Now, whether that was poetic metaphor or genuine architectural insight disguised as superstition, who knows? But either way, the snow was sacred. Cursed in spring maybe, but sacred in the dead of winter. And here's where the scholarly gloves come off. Archaeologists and architectural historians still argue about just how much the Vikings understood about snow insulation. Did they build to take advantage of it deliberately? Or did they just notice that their home stayed warmer under 10 inches of snow and decide not to question it? Some say they were passive participants in a happy accident. Others argue that Norse builders were intentionally designing homes to integrate snow as a seasonal insulation layer. The design certainly suggests some forethought, but again, a lot of the evidence is buried under, well, more snow. You step inside another longhouse, smaller and more modest, and feel the difference immediately. It's snug, slightly smokier but still warm, and when you look up you realise there's snow above you, just a few feet of wood, turf and frozen powder between you and the northern sky. And yet it's quiet, peaceful, almost womb-like. The snow acts as a natural sound dampener too, muffling the wind and insulating you from the chaos outside. It's like living inside a frosty library, if the library also included goats, sausage links hanging from the ceiling, and a toddler chewing on a stick in the corner. That night, lying in your now familiar bed nest of furs and people, you listen. The wind howls outside, whipping around the longhouse, but you barely feel it. The fire glows low. The roof above you groans occasionally with shifting snow, but never dangerously. It's as if the house is wearing a giant winter hat, sturdy, heavy, and just slouchy enough to look cool in a medieval kind of way. And in that moment you realise something profound. Warmth here isn't always about adding heat. Sometimes it's about keeping what little heat you have, retaining it, protecting it, letting the land itself help you out, even if that land is frozen solid and trying to kill you with every gust of wind. So the next time snow blankets the world outside your window, maybe don't curse it right away. Maybe, just maybe, tip your horn of mead to it. Because for the Vikings, snow wasn't just a fact of life. It was insulation, it was security, it was armour. Cold, silent armour that made sure they didn't freeze. And tonight, you won't either. The first time you see a half-naked Viking sprinting from a wooden hut into a snowbank, your brain short-circuits a little. He's barefoot, steaming like a roast, and absolutely laughing as he throws himself straight into a drift of snow deep enough to swallow a goat. You flinch instinctively, expecting some kind of frostbite-induced howl, but instead, he whoops with what sounds like joy. A few seconds later, he's back on his feet, dripping, panting, and grinning like a lunatic as he barrels back toward the hut he came from. And now it's your turn. The hut, as it turns out, is a Viking sauna, bastu if you want to use the Old Norsish term. You step inside and are immediately hit by a wall of heat so intense it makes your eyebrows twitch. The air is thick with steam, scented with birch branches, and utterly silent except for the crackle of hot stones and the soft drip 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 of condensation hitting the earth floor. 3 other villagers sit inside already, draped in nothing but towels and thick skins, sweating like it's a competition. You slide onto a wooden bench trying to act cool while your internal organs debate whether to melt or evacuate. It's not a spa day, it's a ritual. A full-body reset designed to bake the cold out of your bones, open your pores, and, if the whispered gossip is true, maybe even scare off bad spirits. Saunas were more than just hot rooms. In Viking culture, they were cleansing spaces, both physical and spiritual. A place to sweat out the cold, the sickness, the winter. Families would gather weekly, sometimes more often, not just to clean themselves, but to socialise, to heal, to breathe in something other than wood smoke and fermented fish. Here's your historical gem for the evening. Bathhouses and sweat lodges were surprisingly common in Norse settlements, especially in places like Iceland where geothermal heat made warm baths a reality. But even without hot springs, the Vikings engineered these sweat huts with rocks, fire pits, and clever use of sealed earthen walls. They'd heat stones until they glowed, then douse them with water to create thick, bone-penetrating steam. This wasn't some fringe luxury, it was survival therapy. The steam is working on you already. Your skin prickles, your scalp sweats. You lean back, watching the wooden walls shimmer like heat waves on a summer road. One of the women beside you grabs a bundle of leafy twigs and smacks it gently against her arms and legs, repeatedly. She nods toward you, offering the bundle. You take it, hesitantly, and give yourself a cautious whack on the thigh. It stings a little. Then you do it again, and somehow, it feels incredible. It's not self-punishment, it's stimulating circulation. The birch branches, still green and flexible, release a sharp herbal scent as the leaves crumple and the oils heat up. The ritual is called Venik, borrowed from other northern traditions. You're whipping warmth into your limbs, waking up your skin, pushing heat deep into your muscles, and you're starting to see the appeal. It's oddly meditative, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and now it's time. The others rise, without a word, just a nod, and file out of the sauna. You follow them, blinking as the cold air slaps your face like a warrior's handshake. Your skin sizzles against the temperature shift, your breath forming clouds so dense you can barely see. You hesitate for a second, standing in the doorway in nothing but a rapid confidence, before bolting outside. The cold hurts, a raw cellular shock that makes your lungs seize and your feet scream. But then comes the snow. You fall into it, laughing and flailing like a half-boiled seal, rolling in the powdery frost as your body tries to figure out whether to panic or celebrate. You're shivering, steaming, soaking, and alive. More alive than you've felt since arriving. You stumble upright and rush back into the sauna, where the heat embraces you like a long-lost friend with hot, slightly aggressive hugs. Your skin tingles, flushed red, as the others greet your return with small smiles and the same quiet calm they've carried all along. This isn't a novelty to them, it's just Tuesday. Here's your quirky trivia bite. Some Vikings believed the sauna could literally sweat out evil. It was considered a place where the barrier between the living and the spiritual world thinned. Before important rituals or ceremonies, people would cleanse themselves in the steam to prepare, and some even gave birth in these huts, letting the heat ease pain and keep infants warm in their first moments of life. Sauna births. You weren't expecting that one, were you? As you sit quietly, drying off with a thick woolen cloth, you remember something that catches you by surprise. You haven't been properly cold all day. Not inside, not even outside. Between layers of wool, sod roof insulation, smoky hearths, and now this human oven tucked in a wooden hut, the Vikings have somehow made winter survivable, even therapeutic. It's not a war against the cold so much as a dance with it. Hot, then cold. Fire, then frost. Breath held, then released. But of course there's still academic debate here too. Not all historians agree on how widespread sauna use was across all Viking settlements. Some argue it was a regional luxury, more common in areas with access to geothermal heat. Others suggest every village had some version of a sweat hut, even if rudimentary. And while there's evidence in the sagas and the archaeological record, a lot of it boils down, pun fully intended, to local tradition and available resources. You stand to leave, your muscles loose, your skin glowing, and your brain full of steam-fueled euphoria. The air outside feels sharp but manageable. You're not afraid of it anymore. You know how to recover, how to rebuild heat, how to shock your system into survival and come out stronger on the other side. As you head back toward the longhouse, snow crunching beneath your feet and steam still rising off your skin like you've angered a frost god, you think about the rhythm of it all. Hot and cold, tension and release. Every part of this life is designed for balance, not comfort necessarily, but sustainability. The Vikings didn't banish the cold. They embraced it, challenged it, outlasted it. And tonight, as you burrow back into your furs, skin warm, hair slightly singed from the steam, heart still pounding from your snow dive, you realise something wild. You actually kind of like it here. There's a moment just before dawn, if you can call it that in this half-lit land, when everything goes quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but that eerie, watch-your-back kind of stillness. No wind, no clatter of chores, no bleating goat auditioning for a Norse opera. Just silence and the kind of cold that feels sentient. And this morning, you're outside in it, standing on the edge of the village, staring at something half buried in snow that doesn't look like a house. It's a doorway, sunken into the earth like it's trying to hide from winter. A low wooden entrance framed by sodden stone, leading down into a shadow that's darker than any longhouse interior you've seen. You duck inside, because of course you do, and immediately feel the air change. Not just the temperature, but the texture. It's heavier still, and warmer than it has any right to be. You're in a semi-subterranean dwelling, dug into the ground, reinforced with stone walls and timber beams, and topped with a turf roof that, from the outside, looked more like a mossy bump than a building. But inside, it's solid, tucked away from the worst of the wind. And somehow, even cozier than the longhouse. Your boots crunch softly on packed earth as you move further in. The space is narrow, almost claustrophobic, but warmer than you'd expect. There's no fire here, not yet, but the walls aren't radiating chill like every other surface in the village. They're holding on to yesterday's heat like it's precious. You run your hand along the stone, and it's cold. Sure, but not icy. Just still. The kind of stillness you find deep in caves or wrapped inside snowbanks. Here's your historical moment of clarity. Vikings, especially those living in harsher climates like Greenland and northern Iceland, often built these semi-subterranean homes for extra protection against the cold. Digging into the earth offered natural insulation. Below the frost line, the ground maintains a relatively stable temperature year-round. Cool in summer, but mercifully warmer in winter. And with turf roofs and heavy timber beams, these homes function like ancient thermoses, holding heat in and keeping the worst of the cold out. You sit down on a low bench carved directly from the earth wall. There's a faint smell of damp wood and lichen. Overhead, the ceiling is low, barely 6 feet, and reinforced with thick planks. Smoke stains tell you fires have been burned here, but the lack of ventilation means it was probably short-lived and careful, maybe used just long enough to heat the room before being extinguished. This particular structure seems abandoned for now, or maybe it's seasonal. A place to retreat during blizzards or store perishables in a way that doesn't lead to instant frostbite. You spot several storage pots and a few bundled up pelts, still dusted with frost. This place isn't just shelter, it's a bunker, a hibernation chamber. And here's a quirky fact for you. In some Norse settlements, these semi-subterranean homes weren't just about temperature control, they were about secrecy. There's archaeological evidence suggesting some of these were used to hide from raiders or storms, tucked away from main paths, even camouflaged with brush and snow. Essentially, early panic rooms, except instead of modern panic, it was, "Please don't let a rival clan set us on fire," panic. You crouch near what looks like an old hearth pit, feeling the cold rising only gently from the ground. This is where the family would have clustered on the worst nights. No windows, just a single doorway, probably sealed with a thick woolen curtain and a heavy wooden board. Light would have come from oil lamps, heat from tightly controlled fires, and warmth from human bodies pressed close together. And honestly, it sounds kind of nice, until you remember the smell. Because the trade-off for all this cosy cave-like survival is that fresh air. Yeah, not really part of the design. Ventilation was minimal, mostly through a single roof hole or a small smoke vent, which meant stale air, smoke build-up, and probably enough funky foot odour to melt your eyebrows if you stayed too long. There's still debate among historians about how common these structures were. Some believe every settlement had at least one or two, used during specific times of year or shared among extended families. Others argue they were more common in outposts, where weather extremes demanded creative architecture. Either way, what you're standing in right now isn't an anomaly. It's just a lesser seen side of Viking living. You step back outside, eyes squinting against the blinding white of the snow, and suddenly the wind feels sharper than it did before. You didn't realise how much protection the earth walls had given you until they were gone. Your face stings, your fingers ache, even through your woolen mittens. The cold is loud again, but the moment you glance back at that buried doorway, you get it. That hole in the ground isn't primitive, it's smart. A defence mechanism honed by people who knew that staying above ground in this kind of weather wasn't always an act of bravery. Sometimes survival means going under it all, letting the land hold you. You return to the longhouse later, still thinking about it. Everyone's awake now, bustling, working, arguing over something in rapid Old Norse. The fire's been restoked, the air thick with wood smoke and breakfast. It's louder here, livelier, but not necessarily warmer. That little hut, it had something else, a kind of quiet heat, a tucked-away stillness, and that's the Viking approach, isn't it? Not one solution, but many. Fire, wool, earth, smoke. A constant layering of defences, each one covering the weak points of the others. No single method is perfect, but together they form a strategy that doesn't just endure winter, it uses it. You stretch out near the hearth, finally thawing, and think, if the snow gets worse tonight, maybe you'll ask to sleep in the ground. It's only mid-morning, but you're already sweating, under 4 layers of wool, 2 fur wraps, and a hood that keeps slipping down over your eyebrows. You've been assigned to one of the least glamorous but most crucial Viking winter chores, splitting firewood, and while part of you was hoping for something more majestic, maybe forging swords or raiding a monastery, the truth is this. This is how a Viking survives the cold. Not through glory, through chopping. You trudge across the snow-packed ground toward the woodpile following a man named Hauk, whose arms are the size of small tree trunks, and whose beard is permanently rimmed with frost. He doesn't say much. He just hands you an axe, nods toward a stump, and sets to work like he was born with a blade in his hands. The rhythm of it is strangely mesmerising. Lift, swing, crack, stack, over and over. The thunk of the axe sinking into frozen logs echoes across the clearing. There's no machine here, no shortcut, just muscle, repetition, and the sheer necessity of having enough wood to keep the hearth burning through another frigid night. And you begin to understand something. This is heat. Not just potential heat once it's in the fire, but now. As your arms strain, and your back tenses and sweat trickles down your spine, your body generates its own warmth. You don't even feel the cold anymore. Not your hands, not your ears, not your toes. Every cell is focused on movement, on effort, on survival. Here's your historical hit for today. Wood chopping wasn't a once-a-week task. It was constant. Vikings burned through a staggering amount of firewood during winter months, especially in larger longhouses that housed entire families and animals. To keep the fire going around the clock, someone always had to be cutting, splitting, drying, stacking. It was a full-time job. And in some regions, families planned entire days around the wood supply, gathering in warmer weather, storing it indoors, and rotating the logs to ensure they didn't freeze solid. You pause for a second and look around. The village is alive with movement. Someone is dragging a sled loaded with kindling. Another group is binding logs into neat bundles with strips of rawhide. Even the children are hauling twigs and dry moss, learning the system early. Everyone has a role. There's no off-season here. Winter is the season, and it doesn't forgive sloppiness. Hawk hands you a flask and you take a long swig, expecting water, but it's not. It's warm, spicy, and slightly fermented. Something between soup and cider, with a kick that hits your chest like a small campfire. You raise your eyebrows in surprise and he just grunts with what might be approval. You return to your stump and get back to work, your muscles aching now, but in a satisfying way. The cold nips at your cheeks, but your core is burning, your breath forming clouds with each exhale. You feel strong, competent even, like someone who might just possibly make it through February without turning into a human ice sculpture. And here's your quirky bonus. In some Norse settlements, firewood wasn't just about practicality, it had social weight. The quality of your woodpile could signal status. Did you have dry, split birch stacked neatly beside your longhouse? Or were you burning half-rotted pine that hissed and spit and barely warmed the room? People noticed. A good woodpile said you were prepared. A bad one said you might not be around by spring. Of course, there's academic debate too. Some historians believe that firewood scarcity may have shaped entire migration patterns, forcing Viking families to abandon regions when forests thinned and fuel sources ran dry. Others argue that wood wasn't as limited as once thought, and that trade routes brought in extra supplies when needed. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, depending on geography, population, and just how brutal the winter decided to be. Later, you help haul the cut wood back into the longhouse. It's surprisingly heavy now that your arms have gone noodle-like from effort, but the reward is instant. As soon as you stack the fresh logs by the fire, the room brightens, literally. Someone feeds a few pieces into the hearth, and the flames leap higher, casting golden light across fur-lined benches and sleepy-eyed children. You collapse near the fire, breathing heavily, the ache in your shoulders settling into a pleasant throb. Your clothes are damp, but you're not cold. Not even a little. You're flushed with effort, skin tingling from the wind and the work. You look around and realise nobody's just sitting around trying to stay warm. They're doing things. Chores aren't distractions from the cold. They're the cure for it. You watch as others come and go, carrying buckets, weaving baskets, sewing torn cloaks, scraping hides. Even in the deep winter, there's a constant churn of motion. Life doesn't stop when the snow falls. It just shifts into a different rhythm. One where heat isn't just something you sit by, but something you make with your own body. That night, wrapped in furs and listening to the fire crackle, you feel a new kind of tired. Not the sleepy, let me scroll my phone for an hour kind. The bone-deep, well-earned fatigue of someone who faced the cold head-on and didn't flinch. Your hands are blistered, your legs are sore, but you're warm. And more than that, you feel useful. And for a Viking in winter, usefulness is life. The windows in the longhouse, or what count as windows, are nothing like what you're used to. There's no glass, no panes, no delicate frost patterns curling over clear surfaces. Just narrow slits cut into the timber, stuffed with oiled animal hide or thin, translucent bladder stretched tight like nature's version of frosted plastic. Light doesn't exactly pour in. It diffuses, soft and hazy, like trying to see the sun through a sheet of waxed paper. You blink a few times and realise you've gone days without seeing true daylight, and these little slits are all you're getting. You shuffle over to one, your breath misting the space in front of you, and peek outside. Snow glows a faint icy blue under the low winter sky, and the surrounding forest is a dark wall of stillness. The slit is narrow, just wide enough for a lookout to squint through, or maybe loose an arrow if things got dramatic. But it does its job. It lets in just enough light to remind you the outside world exists, without letting all the hard-earned heat escape. And that's the point. In Viking design, windows weren't for admiring the view. They were a heat-loss liability, an open invitation to drafts, and a potential weakness in the structure. So instead of glass, they used ingenuity. Scraped animal hides, stretched bladder, even thinly carved horn, materials that let in light while keeping the wind and snow out. It wasn't clear like modern glass, but it gave the interior a dim golden hue, especially when firelight reflected off the surface. It was practical. It was weird. It worked. Here's your historical detail of the day. Glass was known to the Vikings, especially the wealthier ones who traded extensively, but it was a luxury, imported and rare. Everyday people weren't installing hand-blown windows in their longhouses. Instead, they mastered the art of keeping light in without letting warmth out. Some even built small window shutters, thick wooden covers with internal latches, so they could close up entirely when storms hit or when total darkness was preferable, like during births, illnesses, or funerals. You rub your fingers along the edge of the slit, noting how the timber is smoothed around the opening. Not sharp, not ragged. This isn't a rushed job, it's a calculated decision. Everything in this longhouse was placed and shaped for a reason. Even the size and angle of the windows matter. Slits placed high on the wall help rising smoke drift out. Lower ones, usually fewer, are angled away from prevailing winds. There's no symmetry, no aesthetics for aesthetics' sake, just survival by design. You glance down and notice a soft fur curtain hanging loosely over the bottom part of the slit. Not for decoration, though it adds a cosy touch, but to trap heat. Every opening is double layered, like a thermos. You peel the fur back and a gust of cold air slips through the hide, licking your fingers. It's subtle, but immediate. You let the curtain fall and feel the warmth settle back in like water into a groove. The difference is real. Now here's your quirky fringe fact. Some Viking settlements experimented with mica, yes, that shimmery mineral, as a pseudo-glass material for tiny windows. Mica sheets could be split thin and translucent, offering light with more durability than animal hide. It was rare, and mostly found in higher status homes or in areas with good access to the mineral, but it shows a level of ingenuity that deserves a respectful whistle. Can't afford glass? No problem. Let me just flake apart some rocks until I can see through them. Of course, scholars love a good window debate. Some argue that early Viking homes had no openings at all besides the smoke hole and door, that windows came later, once domestic architecture evolved. Others believe even the earliest longhouses had some form of slit or opening for light and air. Since wood decays and animal hides rot, physical evidence is scarce. What we know comes mostly from sagas, indirect references, and the occasional frozen site that gives up its secrets reluctantly. As the day drags into its long grey afternoon, you notice how the light changes in the longhouse. It doesn't brighten so much as shift. From slate blue to pale gold, then back to blue again. The people here don't seem to track time by hours, but by the quality of the light. When it's yellow bright, it's time to work. When it's blue dull, time to eat or rest. And when it's pitch black and the fire's the only thing casting shadows, that's when the stories start. You sit by one of the windows after supper, pulling a wool curtain aside just a little to peek out. The snow is falling again. Quiet, steady, almost too symmetrical. You watch flakes drift past the slit, glowing briefly in firelight before disappearing into the dark. Behind you, voices hum low and soft. A lullaby, maybe. Or just two elders arguing about the right way to cure fish. It's hard to tell, but the world out there, behind the hide-covered slit, feels far away. Not quite dangerous, not quite safe, just distant. And that's the genius of Viking windows. They connect you to the outside world without pulling you into it. They keep the cold out, the heat in, and let just enough of the sky in to remind you you're still a part of something bigger than this smoky wooden cocoon. You let the curtain fall back into place and lean away, warmth wrapping around you like a thick second skin. The slit is gone, the outside hidden again. The fire pops. Someone coughs, someone laughs. The wind whips against the wall and the window doesn't even flinch. This place wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to survive. And right now, it's doing a better job of that than your entire modern apartment complex. You've gotten used to a lot here. Smoky lungs, communal sleeping arrangements, wool in places wool really shouldn't be. But there's one thing that still catches you off guard every single time. How hot the food is. Not spicy, but scalding. Piping hot, straight from the fire, stew that bites back kind of hot. It doesn't matter how cold it is outside. When the Vikings eat, it's like feeding time in a volcano. And this morning you're finally starting to understand why. You're crouched beside a low stone hearth in a smaller longhouse used just for cooking. There's no smoke hole above this one. Just a few cracks in the beams and a wide enough door that someone occasionally flings open to let the air clear. The fire burns hot and fierce, and above it, suspended on a wrought iron hook, swings a cast iron pot full of thick, bubbling liquid that smells not entirely unpleasant. You peek inside and see what looks like a violent marriage of root vegetables, dried fish, and something that might be goat. It's more beige than anything else, but the steam rolling off the surface hits your face like a warm slap. Beside the pot, another is buried under a heavy fur to keep in the heat. This isn't just cooking, it's fuel production. The Viking diet in winter was designed to warm you from the inside out. It wasn't elegant, but it was brutally effective. High in fat, protein and complex carbs, it turned your body into a walking furnace. Everything was preserved, smoked, fermented or salted within an inch of its life. Fresh anything was a memory by midwinter, so meals became a kind of controlled experiment in survival cooking. Here's your factual snack of the day. Vikings thrived on what we now call a high-calorie, low-glycemic diet. Think oily fish like herring and salmon, reindeer fat, dried meats, fermented dairy, root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, and grains like barley and rye. Meals were dense, slow to digest, and designed to release energy over long periods. The result? Constant internal heat, even during long hours in the cold, You're handed a wooden bowl and a carved spoon by the cook, a broad-shouldered woman with soot on her face and the unmistakable energy of someone who's been awake since before the sky remembered how to glow. You take a cautious bite and it's a lot. Thick, meaty, oddly sour with a faint fishy tang that seems like an afterthought. But it's hot. So hot it makes your teeth sweat, and that's the goal. As you eat, your core warms up like someone lit a candle in your chest. The stew is more than sustenance. It's thermal armour. You look around and see others slurping from bowls with practiced efficiency. No one's savouring, they're loading, fueling up for the work ahead. And now for your quirky culinary moment. Fermented shark. Yep, Harkull, not a myth, not a dare. A real Viking dish still eaten in parts of Iceland today. Greenland shark meat, toxic when fresh, is buried for weeks to rot, then dried until it becomes a chewy, ammonia-rich strip of what can only be described as edible regret. It was, and still is, eaten in winter because it stores well and packs a punch of protein and fat. You're not offered any this morning, which honestly feels like an act of mercy. But one of the younger men holds up a strip of dried something and waves it in your face like he's about to prank you into greatness. There's an open debate among historians about how much of the Viking diet was truly driven by necessity versus tradition. Were these foods loved or merely tolerated? Did they develop a taste for the fermented and the preserved, or just adapt their palates to whatever kept them alive? Some sagas mention feasts with roasted meats and fresh bread, but those were likely rare treats, not daily fare. The average winter meal was functional, unromantic, and designed to stoke your internal fire. Later, you help prepare a midday meal, which involves crushing dried grains with a stone, mixing them with goat's milk, and adding a splash of leftover meat broth. The result is a porridge so thick it holds its shape like a stubborn pudding. You stir, taste, burn your tongue, stir again. It's not winning any awards, but you can feel your belly warming like someone slipped a heated rock inside you. As you carry bowls around to others, you notice how they eat. Slowly, quietly. Heads down, not talking much. Not because they're antisocial, but because eating is serious business. This is how you get through the next 4 hours of hauling wood or scraping hides or boiling water for washing. This is how you survive. You finish your meal and step outside for a breath of cold air. Instantly your face tightens, your eyelashes frost, your lips sting. But your chest? Still warm, still full. That stew, that porridge, that smoked whatever it was, they're doing their job. You feel like a walking furnace. Your feet still ache in the snow, but your core is solid, fueled. Back inside, someone started preparing dried fish strips to chew later. You help salt them, hang them near the rafters, and realise you're starting to think like them. Not, what do I want to eat? But what will keep me warm? You find yourself doing nutritional math you never thought you'd care about. Calories equals heat, fat equals survival, taste equals optional. And that's the Viking approach to winter food. Eat what warms you, not what delights you. Aesthetics come second, maybe third. First comes endurance, then community. Then, if you're lucky, a little pleasure around the fire in the form of hot ale or a hunk of meat too rare to waste on weekday meals. That night, when the last bowl is scraped clean and the fire burns low, you lie back in your pile of furs, full and groggy and warmer than you have any right to be. You've eaten like a Viking, not for joy, not for indulgence, but for heat. And tomorrow you'll do it again, because in this world every bite is a defense against the cold. And tonight, your stomach is your shield. You wake to the sound of someone whispering, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to stir you from sleep with that eerie sense that something unseen is moving nearby. You keep your eyes closed at first, listening. The fire is still burning low, popping now and then like it's trying to join the conversation. Someone's murmuring near the hearth, half singing, half speaking, in that dreamy sing-song rhythm you've heard the elders use before. You finally open your eyes and squint through the firelit haze. There, crouched at the edge of the hearth, is an old woman wrapped in layers of wool and fur. Her face is deep-lined, her hands gnarled like old tree roots, but her voice is steady. She's talking to the fire, not at the fire, to it. Her words fall like offerings, soft and rhythmic, blending into the crackling wood and the gentle breathing of the sleepers around you. You sit up slowly, trying not to disturb the warm human livestock pile you've become part of, and edge closer. She doesn't flinch at your movement, just gestures toward the flame and keeps speaking. You recognise a few words: house, fire, spirit. But the rest is a blur of ancient phrasing and names you've never heard before. Then she stops, just for a breath, and looks at you with sharp, dark eyes. "Keep it fed," she says simply. "It doesn't like to be forgotten." You're not entirely sure if it means the fire or something in the fire, because now you're learning the long-kept Viking secret. In these homes, heat wasn't just a byproduct of survival. It was sacred. The hearth wasn't just a convenience. It was a guardian, a spiritual force, the literal and symbolic heart of the home. And some believed it wasn't just flame that lived there, but something else. Your historical fact for tonight. Norse tradition often included belief in house spirits, known in various forms across Scandinavia as Tomt, Nisse, or simply the spirit of the hearth. These entities weren't gods exactly, but they weren't human either. More like ancient presences tied to a specific home or family. They protected the household from illness, misfortune, and the creeping cold, as long as they were respected. Respecting them meant small offerings: bits of food, a well-tended fire, a clean corner left untouched. Disrespect, that meant bad luck, cold hearths, failed crops, sick animals, or worse. You glance back at the fire, its flickering light casting strange shadows across the beams. The idea that something might live in the fire is unsettling. But then again, you've watched this flame every day since you arrived, and there is something about it. It never quite dies, even when it should. The wind howls and the fire pops louder. Someone mentions a missing chicken, and the flame spits. A child cries in their sleep and the coals shift like they're listening. You've entered the realm of the quirky now, so here's your odd but true fact. Some Vikings would literally greet the hearth each morning. A kind of ritual good morning for the spirit who kept them warm overnight. And at night, before sleep, they'd speak a farewell, or even offer a spoonful of stew or a bit of ale poured directly into the fire. Symbolic warmth returned in kind. Of course, modern scholars love debating how literal this all was. Did Vikings really believe in fire spirits? Or were these traditions symbolic, passed down more out of habit than conviction? Was it religion? Folklore? Or just a way to teach kids not to let the fire die? There's no clear answer, only stories. The sagas mention spirits, gifts, odd happenings blamed on invisible watchers. But whether those were real beliefs or just early bedtime stories, well, you're sitting by a hearth right now that hasn't gone out in weeks, and no one dares let it. The old woman hums again, quieter now, then slowly stands and stretches. She pats the log near the fire with an affectionate little tap, as if tucking it in. Then she shuffles away into the dark corner of the longhouse, vanishing behind hanging furs like a shadow on its way to bed. You're left alone with the fire. You lean closer, feeling its warmth on your face, and for the first time you really look at it. Not just as a source of heat or light, but as something alive. The way it dances, reacts to sound, leans into breath. You whisper, without thinking, "Thank you." And maybe it's your imagination, or maybe it's the 3 bowls of oily stew still sloshing in your stomach, but you swear the flame flares just a little brighter in response. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the walls of the longhouse. Snow slides from the roof in soft thumps, but inside the fire holds, the people sleep, the warmth lives on, and so does the mystery. That night, before you drift off, you set a small piece of bread near the fire as casually as you can. No big ceremony, no one sees you, you just leave it there, just in case. Because in this place, with these people, in this endless winter, you're starting to believe what they do. Warmth doesn't come free. It has to be earned, maintained, respected, and sometimes, maybe, thanked. The next day, you're dragged, quite literally, into a blizzard. Not because someone wants you to suffer, though it briefly feels that way, but because the kids are going outside to play, and apparently you're coming with them. There's no "it's too cold" or "maybe stay in today" energy here. Just one preteen with a devious smile grabbing your sleeve and saying something that probably translates to, "Try to keep up." You stumble outside, squinting through the sideways snow, your breath instantly frosting across your scarf. And what do you see? Chaos. Gleeful, frost-covered, entirely unhinged chaos. Children sliding down icy mounds on slabs of wood, others sprinting through knee-deep drifts, launching snowballs with the accuracy of trained archers. There's laughter, sharp, wild, echoing against the longhouse walls like the winter itself is cracking jokes, and just when you think you've seen the extent of their energy, one of them skates past you. Not with modern skates, of course. These are flat, polished animal bones strapped to the bottom of leather boots with twisted gut cords. She glides over the ice like it's nothing, arms flailing a little but clearly confident. Behind her, 2 boys are racing, awkward, gangly, slipping every few strides but shouting like victorious warriors with every step. Welcome to Viking Winter Games. Here's your historical treat. Vikings didn't just endure winter, they used it. When the farms were frozen, the animals huddled inside and the fishing boats grounded, what was left? Play, competition, practice, and a whole lot of chaos. Ice skating on bones was common in Scandinavia. Archaeological finds have confirmed this over and over again. These early skates weren't for figure eights and graceful pirouettes. They were for speed, for fun, for training legs to move fast even in treacherous conditions. You watch as the kids, none older than 15, race in laps around a frozen pond just beyond the main path. A few of the older ones are using sticks to knock around a ball of wrapped hide, slapping it between each other with surprising skill. It's somewhere between hockey and keep away. And you're invited to join. You strap on a pair of bone skates yourself, wobbling like a newborn deer. The kids are already circling, calling encouragement and insults in equal measure. The leather cords bite into your boots as you stumble forward, arms flailing for balance. It's less gliding and more controlled falling, but they cheer anyway. After several humiliating laps and one dramatic wipeout into a snowbank, you flop onto your back, breathless. The sky is pale and heavy above you, and your clothes are soaked with melted snow, but you're warm, so warm. Not in the cozy by the fire way, but in the burn in your muscles, heart-pounding, breath in clouds way. You could lie here forever. Until, of course, someone dumps a handful of snow directly down the back of your tunic. You bolt upright, sputtering, and chase after them, slipping, laughing, already plotting your revenge. This is winter joy, Viking style. No hot cocoa, no sleds from the store, just homemade skates, packed snow, and a complete disregard for frostbite. Now for your quirky bite of trivia. There are records of Viking wrestling matches held on ice. Yes, on ice. Where the goal was not just to throw your opponent, but to stay upright while doing it. There were also competitive snowball fights, sled races down treacherous hills, and strength tests involving lifting massive stones partially buried in snowbanks. All of it in sub-zero conditions. All of it shirtless if you were really trying to impress someone. And here's where historians debate the line between recreation and preparation. Were these games just fun, or were they covert training exercises for the next raid, the next skirmish, the next frozen battle? Some scholars argue that Viking children were intentionally hardened through winter play, building muscle, coordination, cold tolerance. Others say it was just kids being kids in a world where snow lasted for months and boredom wasn't an option. By midday, you're back at the longhouse, dripping, sore, and vibrating with endorphins. The kids stomp inside, shouting over one another, snow flying off their cloaks in thick clumps. Boots are kicked off, mittens wrung out, cheeks flushed red as berries. No one complains about the cold. No one even mentions it. They're loud, laughing, radiating heat like little living furnaces. You peel off your outer layers and settle by the fire, skin tingling as it starts to dry. One of the girls sits beside you, unwrapping a strip of frozen fish jerky with teeth sharp enough to scare steel. She hands you a piece, grinning, and you chew in companionable silence. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, your shoulders ache in that good, I didn't die kind of way. Later, one of the older boys shows you his skates, real works of art carved from smooth animal bones, drilled and bound with precision. He gestures proudly, pantomime sharpening them on a stone. They're family heirlooms, he tries to explain, passed down, maintained. Better than anything leather or wood alone could do. Bone was light, durable, slippery in the right way, nature's winter tech. You hold one in your hands, marvelling at its simplicity. Just shaped bone. And yet, it let a person glide across ice like a wind spirit. You wonder how many generations have used it. How many races. How many falls and bruised knees and moments of triumph. And as the fire crackles and the snow starts to drift more heavily outside, you feel a shift inside you. A realization. The cold here isn't just survived, it's celebrated. The ice isn't an obstacle. It's a playground, a testing ground, a forge. Vikings didn't just battle winter. They trained in it. They played in it. They raised their children in it. And for a moment, as your body aches and your heart slows and the laughter settles into memory, you feel it too. Not the cold, the power in enduring it. The next time you step into a longhouse, you feel like you're seeing it with new eyes. Or maybe you're just noticing the heat differently, where it clings, where it fades, where it hides. The fire is blazing as always, a constant dragon in the centre of the space. But tonight you notice something you didn't before. Warmth isn't evenly spread. It collects. Pockets of it form in the most unexpected places, like someone mapped out a heat hoard and built the longhouse around it. You wander toward one corner, near a cluster of furs and storage crates, and pause. It's warm here. Warmer than by the door, even warmer than by some spots closer to the fire. No one's even sitting here. You crouch, hand outstretched, feeling along the wall, the floor, and the underside of a low bench. And yeah, it's noticeably warmer. You peel back a hide to find a shallow alcove in the wall, lined with stones darkened from smoke and heat. You wouldn't have noticed it if you weren't already sweating in your too-thick cloak, but now, it's undeniable. You've found a hidden heat trap. Someone clears their throat behind you. It's an older man with a walking stick and the smug expression of someone who knows something you don't. He gestures to the alcove and mutters something that translates roughly to, "Good place to dry your socks." Then he smirks and shuffles away. So you test it. You pull off your damp wool socks, which, let's be honest, haven't been dry since you got here, and tuck them into the little space. Within minutes, the warmth starts to work. You sit back on your heels, baffled. It's not near the fire, there's no flame. But somehow, this spot retains and radiates heat better than half the room. Welcome to the secret world of Viking thermal design. Here's your historical takeaway. Norse longhouses often featured passive heat retention systems, intentional or not. Stones built into the floor or walls near the hearth would absorb heat throughout the day, then slowly release it as the room cooled. Some households even stacked stones intentionally in these little crannies to create personal radiators before the word existed. These weren't flashy design features, they were survival tactics, invisible to the untrained eye but crucial in the long dark hours when every degree mattered. As the day winds down, you begin to notice more of them. A certain clay jar always stored next to the fire, keeping soup warm without boiling. A pile of rocks lined behind a low bench where someone naps during the coldest part of the night. A platform built just above head height, closer to the smoke layer, where older folk sometimes sit and warm their bones. Each one a heat trap, each one a subtle lesson in where to sit, where to store, where to rest. And here's your quirky fringe fact. Some longhouses included smoke lofts. Not rooms exactly, but small platforms tucked near the rafters where meat and fish were hung to cure. But people also slept up there. Voluntarily. Because despite the eye-burning haze, the smoke layer was the warmest part of the building. You had to find the sweet spot. Above the cold, below the suffocation, and if you nailed it, you had the coziest sleep in the house, assuming you didn't roll off. There's some debate among historians whether these lofts were meant for sleeping, or just repurposed by desperate Norse teens trying to avoid goat snores. Some think it was a cultural adaptation, others think it was pure necessity. But the archaeological evidence, charred beams, elevated planks, soot-darkened supports, suggests people definitely used them. If not for sleep, then at least for escaping the chill when your toes started going numb. Back in the longhouse, one of the women demonstrates another trick. She rolls a warm stone, fist-sized and freshly pulled from near the fire, into a thick wool wrap, then tucks it under a sleeping child's blanket. You reach over and feel it, glowing, like a pocket sun. The child barely stirs, already drifting off into a contented, snoring bundle of warmth. She hands you another stone and nods toward your bedding. You wrap it in your cloak and tuck it in. Instantly the space transforms. What was just a fur-covered bench is now a private furnace. It's not hot enough to burn, but it radiates just enough to make sleep feel like a luxury. You catch yourself smiling. This feels almost clever, like you're in on the secret now. There's something deeply satisfying about how subtle it all is. The Vikings didn't have central heating, but they had wisdom passed down in gestures. Where to store stones, when to warm a blanket, which alcove keeps your bread from freezing. It's a language of warmth, spoken in routines and muscle memory. Later that night, as the fire burns low and the village slips into silence, you lie in your bedding, tucked against your own little pocket of preserved heat. You listen to the soft crackle of coals, the shifting of bodies, the low sigh of a sleeping goat. The air is cold, but your little corner is perfectly warm. Not blazing, not suffocating, just enough. And that's the Viking way. Enough heat, enough fire, enough tricks to make it through another night. You don't need to conquer the cold, you just need to outlast it, with a few hot stones, a hidden alcove, a place in the rafters no one else notices, and maybe, if you're lucky, warm socks by morning. By now, you've learned to expect that nothing in a Viking village is accidental. Not the fire, not the clothes, not the goat constantly trying to chew on your sleeve. So when you're told to help with repairs on a longhouse wall and handed what looks like a bundle of moss and mud, you raise an eyebrow. But then someone points to a gap in the wall, shows you how to smear the mixture into the crack, and it all starts making sense. The layout of these homes isn't just practical, it's calculated. Everything here is built to keep warmth in and cold out, down to the angle of the buildings and the filler in the wall seams. You pause and look around. From where you're standing, you can see the shape of the village more clearly than ever. The longhouses are all clustered together, not haphazardly, but in a deliberate huddled formation, like animals conserving body heat. No wide streets, no big open courtyards, just a tight inward-facing arrangement where every roof sheds snow onto a neighbour's wall, and every home helps shield the next from the wind. This is warmth by design, an architectural strategy born from generations of testing, failing, freezing, adapting. Here's your historical highlight. Viking villages were often constructed in tight, deliberate layouts to create what we'd now call thermal synergy. That's a fancy way of saying the buildings helped warm each other. By reducing the number of outer-facing walls and shielding one structure with the next, they minimised the surface area exposed to wind and maximised retained heat. Think of it like a bunch of spoons stacked in a drawer, each one reinforcing the others. And then there's the orientation. You walk around the outer edge of the village and notice that nearly every front door faces roughly the same direction, south or southeast. Not a coincidence. That angle catches the most sunlight during the few precious hours it shows up in the Arctic winter. Even if it's weak, even if the sun is just a pale smear on the horizon, it's enough to slightly warm the entrance, melt ice off the steps, or maybe just give a tiny psychological lift to someone stepping outside to empty a chamber pot. You step between two longhouses and instantly feel the difference in temperature. There's no wind here. None. The walls block it completely, and the packed snow underfoot has been trampled into a kind of icy carpet that's easier to walk on than the powder out in the open. This little corridor is warmer, quieter, even though it's outside. You could probably fall asleep against one of the walls if you weren't afraid of becoming a human ice sculpture. And here's your quirky detail of the day. Some archaeological digs in northern Scandinavia have uncovered drainage channels beneath Viking longhouses. Tiny trenches dug to funnel melting snow and wastewater away from the foundations, preventing ice build-up and keeping floors dry. These weren't grand sewer systems, just smart little trenches dug with care and regularly maintained. Cold plus wet equals death. Cold plus dry? That's manageable. That's survivable. That's Viking engineering. You're led into a small workshop now, half buried in snow and barely tall enough to stand up in. The door opens inward, of course, and the threshold is raised, forming a lip you have to step over. It's annoying, until you realise it's genius. That raised edge stops snow and cold air from rolling in under the door. Inside, the space is cramped but cosy, warmed by a single clay brazier. The walls are thick with clay-plastered wattle, woven branches daubed with mud and straw, then dried rock hard to become an insulative, weatherproof barrier. This place is a heat trap, a workshop sauna. You rub your hands together and feel the clay walls radiating a slow, steady warmth. There's a small ventilation slit near the roof and a fur-curtained doorway. No wasted space, no unnecessary angles. Every board, every stone, every wall is part of the plan. And that brings us to the scholarly debate you didn't know you needed. Were Viking villages always this efficient? Or was it something that evolved regionally over time based on who was freezing the fastest? Some argue that Norse settlements in milder climates didn't need this kind of hyper-optimized village layout. Others say the communal, heat-conscious design shows up even in the oldest ruins, suggesting it was foundational to Viking culture. The jury's still out. But one thing is clear. In the coldest zones, warmth didn't come from luck. It came from planning. You wander to the edge of the settlement and look back. From a distance, it doesn't look like much. Just a collection of sod-covered lumps tucked into the snow, smoke curling from low roofs. But now you know better. Those lumps are a heat network, a carefully arranged machine for trapping, sharing and preserving warmth. They might not have chimneys or insulation foam or solar panels, but they do have centuries of fine-tuned design based on what worked and what didn't, when the wind clawed down from the mountains and tried to turn your bones into brittle kindling. That night, when you return to your usual sleeping spot, you notice someone's moved the benches slightly, angled them toward the fire just a few degrees more. It's subtle, but you feel the difference. A little more heat on your back, a little less chill on your legs. Someone understood the flow of warmth in this space better than you did. You adjust your blanket and sink into it gratefully. And as the fire crackles and the wind rattles the furs over the door, you think about cities back home. Wide streets, detached homes, skyscrapers full of empty space and drafty corridors. Nothing hugging close, nothing shielding the next building. Just architecture that fights against winter without ever truly understanding it. Here, though, everything works together. Here, warmth isn't a product, it's a system. A system built from snow, dirt, wood, and willpower. And tonight, that system is holding. The first time you see a Viking woman swaddle her baby in what looks like 3 pelts, a leather sling, and possibly the lining of a small tent, your immediate thought is, that baby is either the warmest human on earth or about to suffocate. But then the little creature wriggles its arms free, squeaks once like a happy mouse, and falls right back asleep on its mother's chest as she goes back to sharpening a blade. Not a single shiver, not a hint of complaint. This tiny Viking is built for winter, or at least wrapped like it. You learn quickly that babies in the Viking world didn't get any special favours from the cold. No plush nurseries, no central heating, no fleece-lined bouncers humming lullabies. What they got instead was a time-tested system of protection, one that balanced practicality, warmth, and an absurd amount of wool, and maybe some magic. You're still not ruling that out. Today, you're spending time with the women of the Longhouse, midwives, mothers, grandmothers, who've agreed to show you how they keep the smallest, most fragile members of the village from turning into baby cycles. It starts, predictably, with layers. You watch as a young mother unwraps her newborn from its cocoon. First a wool blanket, then another wool blanket, then a fur wrap, then a linen tunic that's about 3 square inches wide, and finally you see an actual baby, blinking slowly like it just returned from hibernation. And here's your historical gem of the day. Norse infants were swaddled tightly in linen or wool, often bound with soft bands of fabric that wrapped from shoulders to feet. Swaddling wasn't just about keeping them warm. It was also thought to help with proper limb growth and, let's be honest, kept babies from flailing into the fire or crawling into a pile of axes. But warmth was key. The layers of wool, combined with body heat from a parent or sibling, kept babies safe through long winter nights, when indoor fires were the only source of warmth and rooms dipped just above freezing.
No.
One of the older women hands you a swaddle wrap made of rabbit fur, soft, warm and suspiciously damp. You raise an eyebrow and she just shrugs. They pee, she says, or at least that's what you assume from the gesture. Of course they do, and they pee a lot. Which leads you to the next vital Viking innovation. Layers were not only thermal, but absorbent. The inside layers of baby wrappings were often changed frequently, and dried near the fire like everything else. The outer layers? They stayed on unless soaked or steaming. And here's your quirky, slightly gross, slightly genius fact. Some evidence suggests Viking babies were sometimes kept in fur-lined slings under their mothers' or caregivers' outer clothing, especially when travelling. Basically, the ultimate wearable baby furnace. The mother's body heat, combined with the swaddling, created a mobile incubator that kept the infant warm even in brutal temperatures. It's like a snowsuit, and Kangaroo Pouch had a very practical, slightly damp child. You watch as one woman expertly wraps her baby and tucks them under her arm like a loaf of precious bread. She doesn't pause in her work, doesn't even slow down. The baby, meanwhile, is out cold, literally and figuratively, snoring softly against her side as she moves about the longhouse, stirring stew and ignoring a toddler smearing charcoal on the wall. It dawns on you. There's no baby zone here, no special nursery, no quiet rooms. Babies are part of the rhythm of the household. bundled, bounced, breastfed and burped, right next to the fire while negotiations over firewood and hide curing go on 2 feet away. Warmth isn't just in their wrappings, it's in proximity. Babies stay close to heat sources, human or otherwise. You even spot one baby laid carefully near a sleeping dog, swaddled and pressed against its flank like a living hot water bottle. The dog doesn't move, just sighs and closes its eyes like it's used to this routine. You ask, again, mostly with hand signals, how they handle the coldest nights. The answer is so casual it's almost absurd. They all sleep together. Parents, siblings, babies, goats, maybe the dog. Everyone wrapped up, tucked in, and pressed into one massive ball of shared body heat. You imagine waking up with a baby foot in your armpit and a goat head on your hip, and honestly, that sounds better than freezing to death in the dark. And now for the scholarly grey area. While the sagas rarely mention infant care directly, because surprise, ancient literature wasn't huge on diaper details, archaeologists and historians have pieced together baby survival strategies from burial finds, textile remnants, and comparative studies of similar northern cultures. Some argue that infant mortality was incredibly high, and that the winter months were especially cruel. Others believe Viking women were highly adaptive, using a wide range of textile skills and folk knowledge to ensure their babies survived even the most brutal winters. You ask about premature births. Do they survive here? One midwife shows you a tiny cradle lined with sheepskin and filled with hot stones wrapped in cloth, a makeshift incubator. She gestures to it with pride. Small but warm, she says with a gentle smile. You're handed one of the swaddle bundles. Not a real baby, but a training doll filled with sand and straw. You try to wrap it and immediately mess it up. The woman shakes her head and takes over, wrapping the infant doll with the efficiency of someone who's done this in the dark, half asleep, while the wind was howling and her brother was shouting about soup. You try again. It's better, tighter. You hold the warm bundle against your chest and realize just how much heat it holds. It's like holding a little furnace, dense, comforting, alive. That night the babies are tucked in among the adults. Not in cribs, not behind doors, but in the thick of it. One wrapped tightly in a fur bundle sleeps between 2 siblings. Another dozes on its mother's chest. The room smells like wood smoke, milk, wool and sweat. But it's safe, it's warm. And as the fire settles low and the longhouse drifts into silence, you understand something simple and vital. The Viking secret to keeping babies warm wasn't magic. It wasn't technology. It was closeness, layers, touch, fire, community. All bundled together in a world determined to freeze you solid. But not tonight. It starts with a shout. Something urgent but not panicked, rising above the usual hum of fire and fur and low conversation. You turn to see 2 men by the edge of the village, bundled and red-faced, unloading a sled piled high with unfamiliar goods, sacks, jars, coils of something that glints even in the dull light. And just behind them, more sleds, more men, more goods. This is no foraging trip. This is a trade run, and suddenly the entire longhouse hums with a different kind of energy. Not survival, but commerce. You step outside, boots crunching over snow that's frozen solid into the consistency of cracked stone, and watch as the sleds are pulled into the village centre. They're heavy with materials you haven't seen before. Thick furs from distant forests, soapstone cooking slabs, chunks of amber, and something that looks suspiciously like silk. Silk. In the middle of a frozen fjord-side village. You do a double take. Welcome to the part of Viking life they don't show you in the gritty battle dramas. Shopping. Because even in the dead of winter, trade didn't stop. It thrived. The cold months were hard, yes, but they were also a time to check supplies, negotiate, boast, show off a little. If you made it to midwinter with enough to trade, it meant you were winning. Not just surviving, but managing, and that earned respect. Here's your solid historical hit. Viking trade networks spanned thousands of miles, across rivers, mountains, and frozen seas. Even in winter, especially in winter, sleds could move across hard-packed snow faster than carts on muddy roads. That meant goods didn't just disappear until spring. They flowed, from neighbouring villages, from coastal ports, from traders who thought nothing of crossing frozen lakes with 2 reindeer and a bag full of Baltic resin. You follow the crowd into the communal hall, now more packed than usual. The goods are laid out with ceremony, sorted onto tables and hides, heavy blankets made from animal hair you don't recognize, carved bone jewelry, salt from the sea, even a few rough iron tools stamped with marks you suspect weren't made in this village. There's laughter, loud conversation, even a few friendly shoves. It feels like a market, yes, but with the energy of a reunion. And here's where it gets interesting. Among the sacks and jars, you start noticing items clearly meant for warmth. Not just firewood or food, but comfort. Fatty oils, beeswax candles, extra warm mittens knit in patterns different from the ones you've seen here. Imported heat, imported luxury. In a world where the cold is a constant opponent, being able to buy a little extra warmth is as close as you get to splurging on a spa weekend. One woman holds up a jar of rendered seal fat and immediately draws a crowd. It's not for eating, it's for burning. Slow, clean, long-lasting firelight in the form of animal oil. You see another trader offering thick felt boots, clearly made elsewhere, dyed a deep blue, the kind of thing that would have taken days to make by hand. There are even bits of fur you can't name. Fox, perhaps. Lynx. Something softer, richer than anything in the local stores. Here's your quirky fact for the day. Warmth was currency. Not in coins, but in value. People traded not just for food and tools, but for comfort. A thicker blanket from a coastal trader, a warmer cloak woven with foreign dye, an imported soapstone that retained heat longer than clay. These things mattered. They weren't just nice to have. They meant the difference between a comfortable winter and one spent on the edge of frostbite. Between sleeping peacefully and waking up with your eyelashes frozen together. You notice that the traders themselves are layered differently. Foreign styles, looser cloaks, mittens with odd stitching. One carries a lantern that burns with a brighter, cleaner flame than anything you've seen so far. Another wears what looks like fur-lined snowshoes that let him glide over the crusted drifts like he's skating. They're from different places, clearly, but they're part of the same network, the same seasonal rhythm. Move goods while the snow is hard. Trade before the thaw turns everything to mud and misery. And of course, there's debate among scholars about how common winter trade really was. Some argue that the majority of Viking trade happened in the warmer months, when boats could travel and marketplaces were full. Others insist that overland trade, particularly via sled and ski, was alive and well even in the heart of winter. The archaeological evidence supports both. Sled runners, imported goods found deep inland, preserved notes in runic script describing cold season barter. They all hint at a winter economy that didn't just survive but thrived under the right conditions. You help unload one of the sleds and are rewarded with a small pouch of dried berries, tart and sweet, a flavour so bright it nearly shocks your winter-numbed tongue. A rare treat. Someone must have traded well for these, and now you're tasting the reward. You glance up and a girl nearby grins at your expression. She bites into a piece of dried apple and nods as if to say, "Yeah, we earned this." Later, after the traders are fed and the goods stored or swapped, the fire in the hall is stoked high. People gather close, sharing new stories, new tools, new gossip. The atmosphere is lighter, warmer, not just from the heat, but from the knowledge that they're connected. That even here, in the middle of a brutal winter, they are not alone. You sit back against the log wall, wrapped in your now slightly improved cloak, a patch of foreign wool added to the shoulder where yours had worn thin, and watch as a woman sews a new pair of mittens with imported thread. Across the room, someone adds seal oil to the fire, and it burns brighter than anything you've seen all week. Outside, the snow still falls, quiet and endless. But inside, it feels like spring came early. The fire's gone out. You wake up shivering, teeth clamped so tight your jaw aches. Your breath fogs in the air inside the longhouse, and your fingers feel like they've been soaking in ice water for hours. For a moment, you think this is just one of those early morning chills, the kind where the fire has died down to embers and someone just needs to poke it back to life. But then you realise there's no glow, no flicker, just a black pit where the heart of the longhouse used to be. You sit up fast, kicking off your blanket and instantly regretting it. The cold clamps down on your chest like a fist. You look around. Everyone else is stirring too, groggy and confused. There's a stillness in the air that doesn't feel natural. It's not just cold, it's the absence of heat. You hadn't noticed how much warmth the fire gave off, even when you weren't near it. Until now. Now, every breath feels wrong. Someone swears softly in Old Norse. You don't need a translation. The fire's dead and the longhouse is freezing. Here's your historical gut punch. Letting the hearth go out in winter was one of the worst things that could happen in a Viking home. Not just because relighting it was a pain, but because everything, the heat, the cooking, the drying of clothes, even morale, depended on that fire. Keeping it alive wasn't just a chore, it was a sacred responsibility. Some families even assigned a specific person, often one of the women or the eldest in the home, to tend the fire through the night, adding fuel, checking the embers, never letting it go dark. Because if it did, this. You throw on your boots with numb fingers and stumble outside, breath catching in your throat. It's not just cold, it's dangerous. The kind of cold that sneaks into your bones and makes you slow, clumsy, vulnerable. Even the goats are quieter than usual, huddled together with frost curling along their backs. The woman who usually tends the fire is already outside, pacing in a storm of fury and shame. Her hands are blackened with soot, her face pale. She must have fallen asleep, or run out of dry wood, or maybe the wind howled just right and pulled the warmth up through the smoke hole faster than she could stop it. Someone shouts from another longhouse. Their fire is still going. Salvation. A group forms fast. People with baskets, iron tongs, thick mittens. You follow them, running alongside as they head toward the neighbouring longhouse. Inside, the hearth is glowing. Barely, but enough. Carefully they dig into the coals, nestling embers into a clay pot lined with dry moss and kindling. The heat is fragile, like cupping a butterfly in your hands and hoping it doesn't die from fright. Then begins the journey back. You walk in silence, feet crunching over snow, everyone breathing carefully as if even that might blow out the weak flame. Inside the longhouse, everything is ready. Fresh wood stacked, a pot set, strips of bark shredded for tinder. One woman kneels by the hearth, whispers something you don't catch, and gently transfers the ember from the pot to the centre of the ashes. A spark, a curl of smoke, the softest whisper of orange, then flame. It's small, scrawny, but it's there. Everyone exhales like they've been holding their breath for an hour. The flame catches, grows, licks its way up the bark and into the kindling. You watch, mesmerised, as heat returns to the room in waves. First to the hearth, then to the stones, then to your hands, your face, your spine. The longhouse isn't warm yet, not even close, but it's recovering, like a body waking from hypothermia. And here's your quirky fact. Some Viking families had specific rituals for reviving a dead hearth. Not just practical steps, but ceremonies. A whispered chant, a touch of salt, a food offering. Because a dead fire wasn't just a household emergency, it was a spiritual one. To lose your flame was to lose your home's soul, and to bring it back, that was an act of power, a renewal. You sit by the fire for the next hour, watching it grow stronger inch by inch. People are quiet, working methodically, socks are dried, tea is made. No one scolds the woman who let it die, though she doesn't meet anyone's eyes. She's already being kinder to herself than anyone else ever could be. You can see it in the way she watches the flames, as if trying to memorize every flicker, every pop. She won't let it happen again. Here's the scholarly debate to chew on. Were these hearth failures common, or rare, dreaded events? Some researchers argue that early Norse homes had backup methods, smaller fires in side rooms, communal fires in the village centre. Others insist that losing the hearth fire was catastrophic, especially during the coldest stretches. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. But today for you, it felt like the edge of the world. When the fire finally blazes strong again, crackling, spitting, warming the walls like a heartbeat returning, you feel your limbs thaw, your mind clears, you realise how many times you took it for granted, that flickering constant, that warm centre, until it was gone. And now, you sit closer. You feed it a stick of dry birch. You feel the heat bloom on your face like a blessing, and you promise, silently, to never let it die again. The fire is blazing again, almost defiantly now, and the longhouse is pulsing with life like a heart restarted. After the close call with frostbite and death by forgotten fire, no one is wasting the revived warmth. In fact, the whole village feels a little extra alive tonight. People are cleaning more vigorously, tending to the goats like they're prized guests, and cooking in massive pots like something is coming. And then you hear it. Laughter, shouting, someone playing a flute that's just barely in tune. You ask the obvious question, what's the occasion? and someone just grins and hands you a heavy horn full of warm ale. It's a wedding, a winter wedding. Your first thought is, why would anyone willingly tie themselves to another human being in the season most likely to kill you both? Your second thought, as the music swells and a pig roast appears out of nowhere, is, why not? Winter, you realise, is the perfect time for a Viking wedding. The harvest is long over, the animals are settled, the warriors are home, and for once, people have time to dance. So that's what they do. The wedding takes place outside under a heavy grey sky that spits snowflakes like lazy confetti. The bride wears a wool cloak embroidered with runes and a headdress made of fur and antler tips. The groom, more or less dressed the same except with slightly more nervous energy, stands beside her as they're wrapped together in a single fur, literally bundled into the same garment as a symbolic "now you share everything" gesture. It's not long, a few words, a toast, a cheer, and then back inside before their toes freeze off, and that's where the real warmth begins. Here's your historical insight for the evening. Viking weddings weren't always lavish or formal, but they were communal, and winter weddings were common, practical even, because they coincided with downtime. With food stored, work slowed, and warriors home from travel, it was a window when people could gather without sacrificing survival. They'd feast, sing, and drink, both to celebrate the union and, let's be honest, to distract from the eternal darkness outside. Inside the longhouse, the heat is now doubled, not just from the hearth, but from bodies. People are shoulder to shoulder, packed in like joyful livestock. You're pulled into a long bench with a bowl of something steaming and thick, barley, pork, herbs, and a lot of salt. Someone adds a ladle of hot ale to it for good measure, and now you're basically eating a hangover in advance. Here's a fun fringe fact. At some Viking weddings, a special bridal ale would be brewed, and the strength of the marriage was said to be reflected in the strength of the brew. The couple was expected to drink it together every day for an entire moon cycle, or what we now call a honeymoon. That's right. The term honeymoon may trace back to this very practice, a month of honey wine, mead, consumption, to celebrate the union, and perhaps more importantly to ensure fertility. The mead is flowing here, no question about that. One man is already asleep against a goat, and someone else has started singing what must be the Viking version of a power ballad. A group of older women begin a chant, low and rhythmic, something primal, and others join in, clapping, stomping, slapping their bowls in time. You can't understand the words, but you don't need to. It's joy, pure, loud, buzzing through your skin joy. Then come the games. First, a wrestling match right there on the floor. Two brothers locked in a friendly brawl while people cheer and toss bits of bread at them. Then a contest to see who can hold their arm outstretched with a full horn of ale the longest without spilling it. You try, you fail, you drink anyway. And in the corner the bride and groom sit together, wrapped again in their shared cloak, hands intertwined over a shared bowl of stew. They're not making speeches, they're just being present, radiating warmth like a second fire in the room. Some of the kids play in the corner, carving runes into a block of wood or reenacting the wedding with dolls made of straw and scrap cloth. One of them adds a third bride who turns into a dragon halfway through. No one corrects her. She gets it. Here's the scholarly debate. Were Viking marriages about love, alliance, or pure practicality? Most agree it was a mix. Arranged matches were common, often for land or status. But personal choice wasn't unheard of, especially among farmers and villagers. The sagas are full of lovers defying their families, couples married for love, or women who refused marriages and demanded their own choices. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all culture. There was wiggle room, especially when both parties had good cloaks and knew how to keep a fire alive. Hours pass in a golden blur. The fire is high, the windows are fogged, and you're half asleep on your bench, belly full, hands warm, head spinning. You don't even realise someone's placed a fur over your shoulders until you feel the weight of it settling like a hug. Outside, the snow continues, soft and endless. Inside, people are singing again, this time slower, deeper, the kind of songs that only come out after midnight and mead. The bride leans against the groom, her braid undone, her face flushed from heat and happiness. It's not a lavish wedding, not a royal affair, but it's rich in ways that count. Because tonight, warmth isn't just from the fire, it's from voices pressed close, from stew shared in silence, from old songs sung half-remembered, from two people wrapped in the same cloak, smiling like spring is already on its way. And in this frozen village, on this endless winter night, that's more than enough. The morning after the wedding feast smells exactly how you'd expect. A stew of wood smoke, wool, sweat, spilled mead, and maybe a hint of fermented fish someone knocked over in the chaos. It's not bad exactly, it's just honest. A dense, lived-in aroma that clings to your clothes, curls into your hair, and burrows into your nostrils like a second skin. You wake up still wrapped in the heavy fur someone kindly threw over you during the wedding's fourth round of communal singing, with your mouth dry and your legs pinned by someone's snoozing dog. You sit up slowly, carefully, because your head feels like someone tried to smelt iron inside your skull. But even through the fog of your hangover and the lingering warmth from the fire that never quite went out, you notice it. The smell of warmth. It's not just smoke or food or animals. It's the combination of everything. The sensory fingerprint of a longhouse that has survived another night. You breathe it in. Wood smoke and wool grease. Damp fur drying by the fire. Ale-soaked breath. Warm pine resin from the logs. And the sour tang of people who haven't bathed in. Well, let's just say it's not a daily activity. It's a Viking cologne. Ode to survival. Here's your fact for today, and it's more nasal than noble. Viking longhouses didn't smell fresh. Not ever. Even in the best conditions, you were dealing with enclosed spaces, livestock, open fires, unwashed bodies, preserved food, and minimal ventilation. And yet, to those who lived in them, this scent wasn't disgusting. It was comforting, familiar, the smell of safety, of home. Because when you could smell the warmth, it meant the fire was alive, the stew was cooking, the roof was intact. No scent. Now that would be terrifying. You shuffle over to the hearth, which is still crackling faintly, and sit down cross-legged, letting the warmth wash over you. Someone tosses in a twist of birch bark and the fire flares up, releasing a burst of sweet, crisp sap into the mix. And just like that, the scent changes. Less stale, more sharp, cleansing almost. You realise that different woods, different fuels, give different scents. You're inhaling Viking aromatherapy, and here's your quirky sensory detour. Some longhouses deliberately burned aromatic herbs or resin-soaked twigs, juniper, spruce, pine. Not just for ritual purposes, but to freshen the air. Not freshen in the modern lemon-scented way, but enough to mask the deeper, muskier elements of day-to-day human stew. Some scholars argue that burning dried herbs also helped repel insects, or even had mild disinfectant properties. Others think it just smelled nice in the middle of winter when everything else was beginning to rot in slow motion. You help stir the morning gruel, and even that adds to the smellscape. Boiled barley, dried mushrooms, and a few leftover hunks of fatty meat bubble up into something thick and vaguely greyish, but steaming like a potion. The smell is hearty, earthy and sour with an undertone of meat stock and ash. It's not appealing in the abstract, but after a night of drinking, it hits your senses like a warm hand to the face. You're learning that warmth here isn't just a number on a thermometer, it's a sensation, a mixture of smells, textures and movement. The hiss of snow melting on boots left too close to the fire, the squish of damp wool drying by the coals, the soft thump of someone shaking out a fur blanket, releasing a puff of aged lanolin and campfire. There's something ancient in the way it all settles together, and this morning, as the hangover begins to lift and the longhouse comes alive again, you find it oddly beautiful. One of the old men sidles up next to you and starts feeding thin slices of smoked fish to the coals. Not to cook them, but to scent the room. It's a winter trick, he explains with a raspy voice and a crooked grin. The fish, barely touched by the flame, smokes slowly, creating a salty sweet perfume that wakes people up without making them gag. He swears it chases away bad dreams, or bad spirits, or both. You're not sure if he's being serious, but you nod and pretend to believe him anyway. And now for your open-ended historical wrinkle. Did Vikings care about smell? Or did they just live with it? It's hard to say. Some accounts from visitors, particularly those of Arab and Christian origin, commented on Viking cleanliness with surprise, even admiration. Weekly washing, regular grooming, and the use of combs and soaps were apparently common. But that doesn't mean things smelled good by modern standards. More likely they smelled functional, clean enough to survive, not fragrant, not foul, just human. You step outside to relieve yourself and immediately get smacked by the scentless cold. Your nose runs, your eyes water. and suddenly you're craving the stink of the longhouse like it's a cozy blanket. Back inside, it's warm again, safe. The fire is healthy, the gruel is nearly ready, and someone is boiling water with what looks like dried juniper berries tossed in, just enough to make the steam fragrant. You close your eyes and breathe in the rich layered perfume of survival. Wood, wool, meat, moss, sweat, smoke, warmth. It's the smell of people who made it through the night, the smell of a fire that hasn't gone out. And in this world, there's nothing sweeter than that. That evening, as the sky slips from steel grey to inky black, and the snow outside settles into a quiet that almost hums, you notice something different. The usual bustle, the scraping of bowls, the thump of boots, the low chatter around the hearth, fades into something softer, more focused. People start gathering, one by one, curling close to the fire, not for food or chores, but for something else entirely. Stories. Someone tosses another log into the hearth, and a small boy fetches a glowing ember with practiced hands, lighting a small oil lamp shaped like a shallow stone bowl. The flickering light throws shadows up along the walls, twisting, stretching, painting runes across the beams and furs. A hush settles in. Even the goats seem to sense it. An elder clears his throat. He's missing most of his teeth and wears the same cloak you've seen on him every day since you arrived. But tonight he might as well be Odin himself. Everyone leans in, and so do you. And then the voice begins. Low, rough, rhythmic. The story's in Old Norse, but you catch enough. Names you've heard. Thor, Loki, giants, frost, fire. But this isn't some textbook retelling of myth. This story is lived in, full of local detail and wild gestures. The gods argue like neighbours. A mountain is clearly modelled after one just north of the fjord. The world is both epic and familiar, as if the divine and the domestic exist in the same cold, smoky breath. This is your historical fact tonight. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment in Viking culture. It was infrastructure, a form of memory, a vessel for law, religion, history and hope. And in winter, when daylight lasted 4 hours if you were lucky, and the cold gnawed at your spirit as much as your skin, stories were survival. They passed time. They built identity. They reminded people who they were, who they'd been, and who they might still become. You sit in silence, listening to a tale about a man who challenged a frost giant to a race across a frozen river. The man, clever but not strong, wore sandals made of deer tendon and tricked the giant by skating on frozen fish. Everyone laughs at that. Clearly an inside joke, but you still smile. And the ending? The man doesn't win. The giant swallows him whole. But from inside the giant's belly he lights a fire so stubborn, so warm, that the giant melts into a puddle. The man walks out smoking like a log. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. Here's your quirky fringe detail. Warmth wasn't just a literal goal in Viking stories. It was symbolic. Fire often represented life, resilience, cunning. A hearth that burned through the night could be a stand-in for family, luck, even divine favour. Some tales say that when a person died, their hearth went out, spiritually and sometimes literally, with coals from their home used to light their funeral pyre. That's how seriously they took the connection between flame and soul. Now comes your scholarly debate. Were these fireside tales based on actual myth? Or were they localised mashups? Part pagan, part Christian, part grandma's imagination. The sagas, when finally written down centuries later, often reflect a strange mix. Some scholars believe many of the fireside versions were deliberately reshaped to suit the needs of the moment. An angry child becoming a wolf in the story, a boastful uncle turned to stone, a winter so long it had to be the god's punishment. The stories were alive, mouldable, and in a world with no TV, no books, and very little sun, why wouldn't they be? The next storyteller is younger, probably barely into adulthood, but speaks with fire in her eyes. She tells a quieter tale, about a woman whose fire kept going no matter what. The wind couldn't touch it. Her enemies couldn't snuff it. Even when she left home, her hearth continued to burn. And when she died, the flame passed to her daughter, and then her daughter's daughter, and so on. At the end, someone murmurs, "Still burns." You get the feeling this isn't fiction. This is legacy. You're handed a small cup of hot mead, sweet, Spiced, just strong enough to warm the chest without blurring the mind. It's ceremonial, a toast to the flame, a way of saying, we made it through another night. The shadows grow longer. The air tightens with cold. But no one moves. Not yet. One child stands and delivers a short, chaotic version of an old story. Something about a fish with antlers and a man who tried to ride it to Valhalla. Everyone laughs, even though it makes no sense. Especially because it makes no sense. You realise this is part of the process. Everyone gets a turn. Everyone contributes to the warmth, not just of the fire, but of the night. You begin to recognise the rhythm. The pause before a laugh. The lean-in moment before a twist. The chorus of approval when a tale ends. These aren't performances. They're rituals. A kind of shared dreaming shaped by snow and flame and memory. And then someone gestures to you. Your turn. The room quiets. Every face looks at you, kindly but expectantly. You panic for a heartbeat, then take a breath, and you tell them about a land where houses are warm not from fire, but from invisible wires in the walls, where windows stay shut all winter, and people sleep alone in rooms the size of longhouses, where fire exists only on screens and stories are watched, not told. You're not even sure what you're saying anymore, but they listen. No one laughs. No one mocks. They just nod slowly, as if you've shared a myth of your own. And maybe you have. Because as you sit back down, someone adds a log to the fire and you realise you've become part of the ritual. A new flame added to the old. And tonight, like every night, the fire still burns. The storm comes without warning. Not a gentle dusting, not the usual wind-driven flakes that rattle the shutters and hush the village into sleepy indifference. This one is different. It arrives like a warband, sharp, fast, and uninvited. You're jolted awake by a sound you've come to respect above all others. Not thunder, not shouting, but the groan of wood under pressure. The roof beams complain. The walls whisper. Something outside slams shut, hard. Then comes the howling. The wind doesn't blow, it screams. It claws at the longhouse with icy fingers, whipping down from the mountains like it's been saving its worst for now. Snow doesn't fall. It flies sideways, driven in waves that rattle every seam of the structure. Someone stirs the fire, tossing on more logs than usual. There's no conversation this morning, only the unspoken agreement. Keep the heat in and stay alive. You help bar the doors. Thick wooden beams slide into place across the entrance, reinforced with ropes and iron hooks. The smoke hole is covered. Extra furs are draped over the small window slits. Every seam, every drafty crack is plugged with moss, wool, or, if you're feeling creative, chewed hide. Inside, the temperature drops fast. Even with the fire blazing, you can feel the cold pushing through the walls like a ghost. The room shrinks, not physically, but emotionally. People sit closer, eyes flicking to the beams above like they're wondering if the roof will hold. The goats are brought inside the longhouse now, tethered near the back, their body heat welcome despite the unmistakable barnyard stench they bring with them. Here's your historical fact of the day. Vikings built their longhouses for this exact moment. Thick turf walls, low ceilings, central hearths. They weren't charming design choices, they were battle plans. The house became a fortress against weather. Every log, stone and sod layer was placed to withstand storms that could last days or even weeks. In the coldest regions, people built windbreak walls or partial earth berms around homes to deflect the worst of the wind's bite. You're inside a bunker, not a cabin. Despite everything, someone starts making soup. Because of course they do. Survival here isn't just about endurance, it's about ritual. When the cold creeps in, you counter it with heat, movement, and broth. Lots of broth. You watch the pot boil, hear the snow clatter against the roof, and realise there's no guarantee it'll hold. This kind of storm tests everything. Structure, supplies, relationships, nerves. And that brings us to today's quirky, less-known Viking fact. Some longhouses had storm rooms. Not officially named, but small interior chambers, often windowless, where people could retreat if the main structure was damaged. These rooms were extra insulated, filled with bedding and close to the hearth. They weren't fun, they weren't roomy, but they could save your life. One woman begins gently shepherding the children into a corner lined with fur and straw, possibly just such a room. You see her stacking stones near the wall, placing one of the warmed hearthrocks nearby, wrapping each child like a burrito of wool and goat hair. No one complains. They just disappear under the blankets like practiced little survivalists. The rest of the adults shift into storm mode. Quiet, deliberate movements. Check the ceiling, reinforce the beams, add more fuel to the fire, heat stones, boil water. Everyone has a role, including you. You're handed a thick slab of firewood and pointed toward the hearth. It doesn't need to be fancy, just fuel, dry and steady. You feed the fire, and it eats greedily. The wind reaches a new pitch. Something cracks loudly outside. The room stiffens, no one speaks. For a moment, you're sure the roof will lift off and carry you all to Valhalla in one frozen gust. But it holds. Somehow, it holds. Here's the scholarly debate for this chapter. How often did these storms push longhouses to their limits? Was this a once-in-a-decade disaster, or just part of the winter routine? Archaeological evidence shows that collapsed roofs and damaged walls weren't uncommon, especially in coastal regions or mountain settlements. Some believe the designs we associate with classic Viking longhouses are actually the evolved versions, homes that survived the worst and were rebuilt stronger. In that sense, even the buildings are descendants of survival. Afternoon disappears into something darker. You realise the storm has blotted out all natural light. Even with the fire and the oil lamps burning, the longhouse feels buried, cocooned. The snow is no longer just outside. It's part of the atmosphere, pressing in on the walls like a great frozen tide. Someone begins singing, not loudly, but clearly. It's an old song, a winter song, the kind that might have started around a hearth 1,000 years ago. Others join in, their voices soft, weaving together like the warp and weft of wool. It's not for performance, it's for comfort, a kind of sonic insulation. You close your eyes, letting the sound and the fire wrap around you. The fear doesn't vanish, but it softens. The longhouse might still fall, the storm might last all night, but the people inside, they are steady, they are warm, and they are together. As the hours stretch into what could be evening or just another dim afternoon, you curl up by the hearth with a hot stone tucked against your belly. The air smells of soup, pine smoke, wool, and sweat. The roof creaks again, but the walls don't move. This is what it means to survive a Viking storm. You don't fight it. You hunker, you endure, you feed the fire, you make the soup, you sing the songs, and you pray the roof holds. Tonight it does. Morning comes slowly, reluctantly, like someone dragging their feet through knee-deep snow. The storm is gone, but it hasn't left quietly. The world outside the longhouse looks like it's been erased. Soft white dunes piled high against the walls, the sky low and pearly, and not a single footprint in sight. It's quiet in that heavy post-chaos kind of way. The calm that settles, not because everything's fine, but because everything that could have gone wrong didn't. Barely. Inside, though, it's warm. The fire's still glowing strong, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and last night's soup reheated for breakfast. Your bones ache from the cold, from sleeping on a bench with a goat as a footrest, but you're alive. And honestly, that's the whole point, and you made it through. Everyone moves slower today, like the adrenaline has finally drained and left nothing but tired limbs and sore joints behind. No one's rushing to start chores. There's a kind of shared understanding that today, this day, is a gift. Survival deserves a pause. Someone hands you a chunk of chewy bread and a mug of hot broth that might be 50% salt, and both taste like victory. You step outside, breath catching in your throat at the brightness. The sun's reflecting off the snow so hard it's like the gods turned on every light in the sky at once. You shade your eyes and look around. The longhouse is still standing, smoke curling lazily from the smoke hole. The walls held, the roof held. Even the goats are alive and mildly annoyed, which is how you know things are back to normal. Here's your final historical reflection. Viking life wasn't about mastering nature. It was about surviving it, with just enough stubbornness, strategy, and shared warmth to keep going. These weren't people who waited for better weather. They built homes and communities that expected the worst. And somehow, they kept finding ways to endure, to adapt, to wrap themselves, literally and figuratively, against the cold. You help clear the snow from the doorway with a carved wooden shovel that's half snow tool, half heirloom. Others are digging out sled paths, checking firewood supplies, inspecting the thatch for leaks or weak points. Everyone's moving again, slowly returning to the rhythm that winter demands. Not fast, not loud, just steady. Purposeful. Here's your quirky closing fact. There's evidence that some Norse families celebrated surviving particularly brutal winters with small rituals. Nothing grand, just a shared toast, a song, or even a carved rune added to a family beam. A little etching that said, "We were here. We made it." Not every winter was guaranteed, and they knew it. You feel that truth today, deep in your fingertips as you run your hands along the cold wood of the longhouse doorframe. Later, after the sun starts to dip again, and yes, it's still ridiculously early in the day for that, you're back by the fire, watching the kids play a game with bones and carved tokens, arguing about whether a stick counts as a sword or a staff. Someone's making stew again. A man tunes a lyre and hums what might be the start of a song, and one by one, the rest of the longhouse fills with the easy murmur of people no longer afraid of the silence. You lean against the same wall you first stood by weeks ago, when all this was new and loud and strange. Now it's yours, a little bit. You're not just a guest anymore. You've helped carry wood, you've chased goats, you've burned your tongue on soup, you've had your boots stolen by a child, slept next to a grandmother, told a ridiculous story at the hearth, and learned, truly learned, that warmth doesn't come from fire alone. It comes from people, from the way they wrap you in furs without asking, from the laughter shared over dried fish and ale, from the silence they hold with you when the storm winds scream and the roof groans, and everyone is pretending they're not afraid. You remember that first night, how cold your fingers were, how alien the dark felt, how you thought you'd never get used to the smoke, or the smell, or the idea of sleeping with your head inches from a goat's rear end. But now, it smells like safety. The smoke, the sweat, the wool, the meat. It's the scent of resilience, of life, of defiance. Here's the scholarly debate to leave you with. Did Viking villages thrive in winter, or just scrape by? Some say these people lived in constant hardship, barely ahead of the frost. Others argue they embraced the cold, turning it into a season of reflection, closeness, and community. The truth, like always, is probably somewhere in the middle. You'll carry this experience with you. The memory of the longhouse, the heat of stones wrapped in cloth, the crunch of snow under wooden soles, the sound of a storm pressing in but never quite winning. And tonight, as the fire crackles low and someone starts another story, half myth, half memory, you pull your fur up to your chin, breathe in the warm, smoky air and smile. You probably wouldn't survive this again. But tonight, you did. The fire is down to a quiet glow now, just enough to paint soft gold onto the walls and the faces around it. No one's talking much anymore. The stories have wound down, the stew is finished, and even the goats are asleep, huddled in a heap near the door like lumpy furry guardians of the night. You're tucked beneath a heavy woolen blanket, one that smells faintly of lanolin and pine smoke. It's scratchy, it's perfect. The warmth is steady now, not blazing, not fleeting, just there, earned, held, like a secret between you and the hearth. Outside, the snow continues to fall, softer now, whispering down onto the rooftops and smoothing the edges of the world. The longhouse sighs in the wind, the beams creaking gently. But you're not afraid. Not anymore. You know this place. You've lived it, breathed it, survived it. The Norse didn't just outlast winter. They adapted to it, designed for it, respected it. And now, maybe, so do you. Your fingers are warm, your stomach is full, your eyes are heavy, and somewhere, just above your head, you can hear the quiet breathing of a dozen other people who made it through another night, same as you. So close your eyes, let the snow fall, let the fire fade to embers, because tonight you're wrapped in wool and story and history, and for now, for this one quiet moment, you're home